Chapter 29:29. Xing Tian could be said to be very satisfied with this lunch. Before his cultivation was completed, Xing Tian ate raw meat and drank blood. Later on, he ate some spiritual fruits and spiritual herbs. He would eat anything that could replenish his cultivation. However, there were hundreds of flavors in it, and it was delicious. However, although this meal was also full of different flavors, it still made people feel very comfortable. It was as if his blank life had been dyed with color. After this meal, Xing Tian's impression of Xiao Man had changed. As he ate more, Xing Tian became a little addicted to these delicacies. However, the state of mind of a cultivator had always been relatively firm. Therefore, Xing Tian controlled himself and did not let himself fall because of these. Although Xing Tian had thought of doing it himself, how could he, a dignified level 7 powerhouse, and even the #1 person in a world, do these things? However, looking at the beast realm, most of them were raw meat and drank blood. It was almost impossible for them to cook. During this long period of time, Xiaoyang spent most of his time cultivating to consolidate his realm. He did not know what kind of unknown dangers he would face in the bright curse realm. Therefore, Xiaoyang could only strive to stabilize his cultivation. During the chat, Xiaoyang also learned more information. For example, the sect behind Ming Jun was called the Ming Xin sect. There wasn't much information about this sect that had spread out. However, one thing was certain. The Ming Xin sect was the most powerful existence in the bright curse realm. Along the way, they had encountered some small disturbances. No matter where they were, they did not lack those wandering cultivators who became bandits. Their strength was naturally uneven. There were even some who were bold. When King Wu was at his peak, he dared to set up checkpoints to intercept the incoming spaceships and rob them. For these bastards, Xing Tian just released his aura and scared them away. They did not dare to come close at all. Of course, when he encountered those whose realm was suitable, Xiaoyang would stop Xing Tian and let Xiao Man fight against these guys. Although Xiao Man's realm was not low now, she still had some shortcomings in actual combat. Therefore, now was a great opportunity. After a few big battles, Lil Man's strength also began to solidify, and his fighting style also began to become fierce. In the past, Lil Man had very few chances to make a move. In her opinion, the purpose of her cultivation was only to serve the young master. If Lil Man didn't cultivate, he would have aged long ago, or even turned into a pile of dirt. Comparing the lifespan of an ordinary person to that of a cultivator was like comparing a firefly to the bright moon. Seeing Buchi's fighting style, Xing Tian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He could see that Xiao Man was indeed very talented. He could see Xiao Yang's shadow in many of her attacks, which were very fierce. However, his technique was very immature. He used some brilliant techniques, like a 3-year-old child playing with a broadsword. It gave off a nondescript feeling. In this regard, Xiaoyang was not in a hurry. As long as he had more actual combat experience, he would naturally be able to make up for it. Furthermore, Xiaoyang had already decided in his heart that as long as he didn't have to fight, he would let Lil Man fight. After all, Lil Man couldn't live up to his name. Perhaps she couldn't always follow Xiaoyang. Now, Xiaoyang could be considered to have started making plans for Lil Man's future. This was to prevent Lil Man from being bullied after he left and not having the heart to fight back. Occasionally, Xing Tian would give some pointers. From his point of view, he was just saying a few words. From Xing Tian's point of view, this was just him thanking Lil Man for the meal. It wasn't anything good. When the flying ship passed by the Enflame realm, Xiaoyang didn't take a look. As for what happened there, it had nothing to do with Xiaoyang. He had already said what needed to be said. As for Nan Hong, who was favored, he was indeed looking forward to what kind of achievements he would have in the future. But that would be a matter for the future. Nan Hong's breakthrough that day was like breaking through bamboo. It looked beautiful, but there were still many hidden dangers. As such, it would take a very long time for him to stabilize his cultivation. Therefore, the current Yin Flame realm was a world of ordinary people. Xing Tian looked at the Yin Flame realm with a hint of helplessness at the corner of his mouth. Their Wanshou realm had been in a stalemate with them for thousands of years. The land they could conquer was very limited. However, Xiaoyang and the others had beaten their entire realm into submission in a short few months. This was the gap between them. They had no choice but to be convinced. Heroes were created in troubled times. In Xing Tian's view, such a statement was more or less looking down on Xiaoyang and the others. Perhaps they had always been so powerful, which was why they could reach this step today. As for that genius who suddenly rose up in the Yin Flame realm, Xing Tian really didn't put him in his eyes. He felt that it wasn't a big deal. The world was so big and numerous. Geniuses were like white clouds and gray dogs, vast and boundless. Those who could stand out were likely only a few people. The journey was long. The three of them were companions. They would occasionally talk, so it wasn't so boring. From the conversation, they had some understanding of each other. At the same time, Xiaoyang also had a better understanding of the Wanshou realm. That place was indeed different from the place where human cultivators lived. Although they had cultivated into a human form, no one was in charge of etiquette and music. Therefore, their actions mostly maintained their nature. Of course, there was also a benefit to maintaining their nature. The valiant style of the Wanshou realm could also be preserved. All along, Xing Tian felt that something was wrong. However, at that time he was powerless to change it. Now his words had weight and could be changed. Similarly, he also turned a blind eye to it, because Xing Tian understood a new principle. It was very difficult to change something that came from one's bloodline. Once it was forcefully implemented, the rebellious nature of the Wanshou realm would be completely activated. At that time, the war would also erupt. In the end, the Wanshou realm's vitality would be greatly damaged because of this. Other realms might even take advantage of it. Therefore, the truth was in the hands of a few people. If they understood, they understood. If they didn't, they couldn't force it. A few months passed, and they were getting closer and closer to the Bright Curse realm. When they saw the outline of the Bright Curse realm, there was also a flying ship beside them. It seemed that their destination was the same. Xiaoyang and Xing Tian both looked sideways and found that the people on the flying ship were not simple. Their realm was not low. As for their specific strength, they naturally didn't know until they fought. Chapter 2930. That flying ship could be considered to have taken the initiative to approach. So Xiaoyang and Xing Tian immediately raised their vigilance. In addition, they had already entered the territory of the Bright Curse realm, so they naturally had to be more careful. The two of them had no friends here. On the contrary, they had enemies. If they were careless and fell into the other party's trap, then there would be unspeakable suffering. Moreover, the atmosphere of the middle world was like this, or it could be said that the upper-class world was like this. It was common for people to kill and steal treasures. Xiaoyang and Xing Tian looked at each other. They already knew what the other party was thinking. If the other party was really here to find trouble, they were not afraid. The other party's strongest person was a 7th-level martial emperor, the same as Xing Tian. However, if they fought, the performance of their combat power would most likely not be on the same level. Even if Xing Tian was no match for them, there was still Xiaoyang to hold the line, so they were not afraid. I wonder who you are. Xiaoyang saw that the distance was getting closer and closer, so he shouted loudly. At this time, an old man stood at the bow of the ship. He was also sizing up Xiaoyang's flying ship. At a glance, he could only see 3 people. Their cultivation levels were uneven. I am from the Wind Speech realm. The old man cupped his hands and said, The Wind Speech realm. Xiaoyang and Xing Tian only knew this name a few days ago. This realm was sandwiched between the Bright Curse realm and the Yin Flame realm. Most of the cultivators in the Wind Speech realm were indifferent by nature and stood aloof from worldly affairs. In this violent middle world, it was like a paradise. All along, The wind speech realm rarely had wars because they almost never took the initiative to provoke others. Of course, the wind speech realm itself was not weak. If the surrounding realms wanted to start a war with them, they had to consider whether they were a match for them. Although the wind speech realm did not like war, it did not mean that they were pushovers. So, it's a senior from the wind speech realm. Sorry for the disrespect. Xiaoyang cupped his hands and said, in this way, it could be considered a Jianghu greeting. Seeing that the three of them were not hostile, the old man stroked his white beard with satisfaction. It was not easy to see such a peaceful young man. Geniuses had always been proud. They were so young, but did not have any hostility. It was indeed not bad. May I know where you three fellow Taoists are from? The old man asked. Xiaoyang only smiled and did not reply. He did not want to reveal his background just like that. After all, if there was a conflict, the world behind it might suffer. This junior is Xing Tian from the 10,000 Beast Realm. Xing Tian was the first to speak. Xing Tian wasn't afraid of these things. The 10,000 Beast Realm had always been intrepid. It was enough as long as they did not take the initiative to go out and cause trouble. Could it be that they were afraid of trouble coming to them? When the old man heard this, the corners of his eyes couldn't help but twitch. Naturally, he had also heard of Xing Tian's name. Soon after, he smiled and said, the younger generation will surpass us in time. I didn't think that fellow Xing Tian had already reached the 7th rank. Xing Tian only smiled faintly. He didn't want to say much about this. I'm Feng Ju, the old man said. Xing Tian cupped his hands again, indicating that he understood. Xing Tian did not want to continue this conversation. Since the cultivators of the wind speech world stood aloof from worldly affairs, there was naturally no need to continue this conversation. Moreover, he felt that he had revealed his identity so that he could calm down a little. May I know why fellow Taoists are heading to the bright curse world? Feng Ju didn't seem to want to give up and continued to ask. Xiaoyang also felt a headache. However, looking at Feng Ju's kind appearance, he couldn't get angry. He could only smile helplessly. It's nothing. I just want to walk around and see the atmosphere of different worlds. If I'm lucky, I can encounter some scattered opportunities. It's also a good thing, Xiaoyang said with a smile. This could be considered the most common prevarication. Feng Ju also knew that this was a lie, but he didn't care. After all, when one was outside and in the Jianghu, one had to be careful with every step. If he said something wrong, it would lead to a lot of trouble. It seems that fellow Taoists know nothing about the current situation of the bright curse world. This old man is also a warm-hearted person. I'll tell you what I know. It's also a good karma, Feng Ju said. Now, Feng Ju's view of the young man in black had changed a little. His realm was lower than Xing Tian, but Xing Tian seemed to be the leader. Therefore, the young man in black was probably a big shot who didn't reveal anything. Otherwise, how could Xing Tian be like this? Thank you, Senior, Xiaoyang said with a smile. He wanted to know what happened in the bright curse world that made the cultivators of the wind speech world come to join in the fun. Some time ago, I heard that there were many white lights in the bright curse world, and the strange phenomena were continuous. With such signs, I'm afraid that some treasure is about to appear, Feng Ju said in a deep voice. Hearing this news, Xiaoyang frowned slightly. It seemed that their luck was not bad. That's why I brought my disciples here to travel. It can be considered to broaden my horizons, Feng Ju said with a smile. Xiaoyang also cupped his hands and said, Thank you for telling me, Senior. Feng Ju was stunned for a moment. This young man's words were really casual, making him feel like he was being ignored. Xing Tian rubbed his hand on the railing. He felt that something was wrong with the birth of the treasure this time. But then again, there were treasures appearing at every moment in the 3,000 worlds. Now that it was the bright curse world's turn, there didn't seem to be anything wrong. We are also considered to be fated. Since we are all traveling, I also know the bright curse world. How about I invite the three of you to travel together? Fengju asked with a smile. In Fengju's view, Xingtian was the #1 genius in the myriad beast world. Now that he had cultivated to the realm of rank 7, his strength was naturally not to be underestimated. Although the man in black robe was only rank 6, Xingtian did not neglect him at all. His strength was probably not bad. At least in terms of identity, he was not weak. If there were such people accompanying him, if he, Fengju, had a conflict with anyone in the bright curse world, with these two mighty figures holding the fort, many problems might be solved. In this matter, Fengju's selfishness was still heavy. Of course, the birth of the treasure was for the virtuous, but if one did not have the slightest intention, it naturally could not fall into his hands. If he could make use of these two young people to help him, then everything was possible. One would not rise early without benefits, that was how it was. Fengju's so-called forming good karma was also to pave the way for things that were beneficial to him. As for making friends, in Fengju's view, that was the wishful thinking of the young people. At their age, they had long stopped believing in these things and only believed in benefits. Chapter 29:31. Although the spell realm was not a dragon's lair or tiger's den, there were still many powerhouses. With Fengju's cultivation base, he could be considered a figure, but if he wanted to compete with those top powerhouses, he was still a little lacking. If he could borrow the power of these two young people, he might be able to get unexpected benefits. Now he was just moving his mouth. If he could win it, it would be a great thing. Xiaoyang cupped his fists and apologized. Thank you for your kind intentions, Senior. We just want to see the scenery and the local customs. When it comes to opportunities, we always leave it up to fate. The corner of Fengju's mouth twitched twice. This statement was too evasive. However, he could not fall out with them. On the surface, he was still amiable. If it weren't for Xingtian, Fengju would probably have a different expression on her face. In that case, I won't force you, Fengju said with some regret. It seemed that it was not easy to fool these young people. Everyone had reached this realm. They were all cunning old foxes. How could they easily become someone else's tool? Farewell. Xiaoyang cupped his hands and said. He turned around and drove the flying ship to the bright spell realm. Looking at the flying ship that was already far away, Fengju frowned slightly and sighed. At the same time, he was also hesitating whether he still needed to bring these disciples into the bright spell realm. Although bringing the disciples here to gain experience was just a pretense, if there was really an opportunity, Fengju would naturally have to fight for it. Perhaps, if he fought with all his might, he could break through the shackles. However, these disciples could not help much. Instead, they would become his burden. Therefore, Fengju could be said to be hesitant. He could not make up his mind for a while. Fengju had also confirmed that the news of a great opportunity in the bright spell realm had probably spread everywhere. There would probably be powerhouses from all sides coming. At that time, if he still wanted to stand out and snatch the opportunity, wouldn't that be harder than ascending to the sky? Thinking of this, Fengju's heart was filled with unwillingness. What was this? Xiaoyang did not take Fengju, who he met on the way, to heart. He only knew that there was no sudden good. These people who appeared out of nowhere looked kind on the surface, but it was likely that most of them had a request. After all, how could they easily contribute to others? Sometimes the so-called good karma was just an excuse. Of course, there were also some powerful beings who liked certain juniors and did it on purpose. It was just for the sake of having more incense in the future. However, they came from different places from Fengju, and their strength was not much different. Therefore, this so-called good karma had some problems. After entering the bright incantation realm, Xiaoyang also felt that the aura here was different. The flowing cloud realm was gentle, the myriad beast realm was wild, and the inflame realm was gloomy. Although the atmosphere of the bright curse realm was somewhat similar to that of the divine realm, there were also great differences. It felt very bright here, as if there was no darkness at all. However, the righteousness contained within it was also somewhat frightening. It was said that the Great Spirit existed forever, and the aura here had the meaning of correcting excessive arrogance. It even gave people the feeling that if the water was too clear, there would be no fish. It was as if standing on this land, all you could feel was righteousness, and no villains would appear here. However, this was just a feeling. The human heart had always been unpredictable, and no one could tell what kind of changes and possibilities would appear here. After entering the bright incantation realm, Xiaoyang also put away the flying ship immediately. They entered the bright incantation realm with the attitude of ordinary cultivators. Xiaoyang and Xingtian both suppressed their own aura at the same time, so that others would not be able to easily detect them. After all, they were outsiders. If their realms were too high, once they were discovered by other powerful beings, they might face many restrictions in their following actions. They both suppressed their realms to around the 3rd level of the martial emperor realm. This was also in line with the young people from other worlds who came out to train. As for their appearance, they did not change it. After all, no one in the bright incantation realm knew them, so there was no need for that kind of trouble. Back then, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu had disguised themselves in the myriad beast realm, but that was only for the sake of security. The atmosphere here makes me feel like I'm sitting on pins and needles, Xingtian said with a wry smile. Xiaoyang also nodded. It could be said that this feeling was very uncomfortable. Every world had its own characteristics, and they were all different. Even if there were some similarities, it would not be roughly the same. Xiaoyang and Xingtian's realms were not low, so they only needed to use some small tricks to suppress this feeling, and it would not be too uncomfortable. However, Xiaoman was somewhat inexperienced, so she also felt a little impetuous, as if everything was not pleasing to her eyes. Fortunately, Xiaoman's self-restraint was very strong. Otherwise, she would have already lost her temper. Actually, we should have asked Fengju more, Xingtian said. Xiaoyang smiled but did not say anything. Sometimes, if he spoke too much, he would inevitably give himself away. In addition, his impression of Fengju was that she was two-faced. He did not have a good impression of her, so he did not want to deal with her too much. Let's enter the city, first to find out some information, Xiaoyang said. Xingtian nodded. This was also what he wanted at the moment. Of course, Xingtian was more curious about whether the Mingxin clan had a secret technique that could bring people back to life. Whether Mingjun was still alive was also something that Xingtian was more concerned about. If the other party was really alive, then Xingtian would definitely have a battle with him to get back the face that he had lost. This seemed like a small regret, but in Xingtian's heart, it was as if it had taken root and sprouted, and could not be dismissed. He just did not know how strong the Mingxin clan was, and whether he could still retreat safely after the battle with Mingjun. Soon, Xingtian stopped thinking about this problem. He had a partner like Xiaoyang by his side, so worrying about this was completely unnecessary. Back then, Xiaoyang was able to escape from dangerous places like the Myriad Beast Realm and the Inflame Realm. It was naturally feasible in the Ming Spell Realm. However, Xingtian had to consider another problem, and that was whether Xiaoyang would bring Xingtian along when he retreated. When he thought of this problem, Xingtian could not help but laugh. Who could be sure of such a situation? Xiaoyang led Xiaoman forward. There was a city as far as his eyes could see. Now that he was going to find out more information, he could plan his next step. Xiaoyang was very curious about whether there would be an opportunity to appear. Chapter 2932. Whether or not the opportunity would appear, or whether or not they could get their hands on it. These were all questions. However, there was no need to be anxious about this matter. Now that the opportunity had appeared, if there was a natural phenomenon, it would not appear until the time was right. Therefore, there was no need to be anxious about this. They just had to wait patiently. It was impossible for them to easily believe the words of others. When the time came and they rushed over without knowing anything, what they would bring to themselves in the end would only be a disaster. In fact, he might even lose his life in the process. Along the way, their speed was neither fast nor slow. At the same time, They were carefully observing the grass and trees around them. The place where they entered the bright curse realm might be, because it was a relatively remote place. There were not many cultivators here. When they passed by, the highest realm was only King Wu's realm. The bright curse realm had never had a war in the past tens of thousands of years, so they did not have the concept of the border here. This place was different from the flowing cloud realm and the Flame realm. Because they were invaded, the border was heavily guarded, and there were powerful figures overseeing it. This place seemed to be just a small place, and the cultivation atmosphere was not very good. After a while, they arrived outside the city. The words Shuanghu City were written on it, and it looked particularly eye-catching. There were no guards at the door, and the defense was relatively lax. The main reason was that it was too peaceful, so it was useless to set up these positions. Moreover, the atmosphere in the bright curse realm was also different. There were sects, and there were many cities that intersected with each other. After entering Shuanghu City, the three of them found the most prosperous inn in the city. Of course, there was another reason why they chose this place. The innkeeper was also a cultivator, and the waiters were all at Wu Zun's cultivation level. If they were all cultivators, then they would naturally be more informed. They could also stay here with peace of mind and save effort. Innkeeper, 3 of the best rooms, Xiaoyang said. At this time, the innkeeper also walked over. He nodded and bowed, saying, "Please come in." The innkeeper politely led the 3 of them into the inn, nodding and bowing. The innkeeper's strength was not bad. He was at the 3rd level of King Wu's strength. Such strength was not bad in such a small place. It was somewhat strange for such a person to be a shopkeeper here. "Judging from your accents, are you foreigners?" the shopkeeper asked with a smile. Xiaoyang just nodded. He sized up the shop owner and was quite curious. "I believe that the reason why the 3 of you came to the bright curse world this time is because of the strange phenomenon of heaven and earth that appeared in the bright deity sect. I'm afraid that a great treasure has appeared, so you came to investigate," the shop owner said with a smile. Xiaoyang didn't deny it and said, "That's indeed the case. The 3 of us came here together precisely for this matter. Does the shop owner know something?" "Sir, you've asked the right person. I've heard a lot of rumors these days," the shopkeeper said with a smile. Over the past few days, people had come and gone, and he had obtained a lot of fragmented information from them. Furthermore, he had organized these things and turned them into his own topic of conversation. Who in Shuanghu City didn't know that the manager of Yunfeng Inn was the most well-informed person in the city? "We're not familiar with this place. Can the shopkeeper give us some pointers?" Xiaoyang asked with a smile. What they lacked the most now was information. If they could get some information from the shopkeeper, it would be a good thing. Moreover, the reason why they were staying here was to gather more information before setting off on their journey. "It's okay for me to tell you this information, but it's inevitable that my mouth will be a little dry if I tell you too much," the shopkeeper said and gestured. The shopkeeper's hands were rubbing, and his attitude was very obvious. If they wanted information, they had to pay for it. There was no free lunch in the world. You want to get new information for free just by staying in the shop? How could there be such a good thing? Moreover, the money they earned from staying in the shop was nothing. They earned a lot from selling information in these few days. Xiaoyang naturally understood the shopkeeper's meaning. He immediately took out 2 spirit stones and handed them to him, saying, "Is this okay?" There were 2 spirit stones in his hand. The shopkeeper was very excited. Although these things were not precious, they were still in high demand in Shuanghu City. Most of the things that circulated here were gold and silver. Spirit stones were very rare. Most of them were even taken by the children of the aristocratic families for cultivation. How could there be any spirit stones circulating outside? Nowadays, spirit stones could be said to be priceless. "Customer, don't worry. I'll tell you everything I know." The shopkeeper nodded and bowed. With such a big spending, it could be seen that these 3 were also rich masters. If he served them well, he would be able to make a profit in the next few years, even if he didn't open for business. If he met those who were willing to spend money, the returns he could get would be even more. Therefore, the shopkeeper was very tempted. He felt that if he served these masters well, he would be able to make a profit, and a big profit. Customer, to be honest, the natural phenomenon in the Mingxin sect happened half a month ago. I heard that the auspicious signs are endless. The treasure that appeared this time is even more amazing. The shopkeeper said with a smile. Hearing such words, Xiao Yang's face suddenly darkened. This was the information he exchanged for 2 spirit stones? He had long stopped listening to this. What was the point? Seeing the black-robed youth's unsightly expression, Nian Yu immediately knew that the other party was an impatient person. So he continued, Of course, there's nothing much to say, but I heard that the treasure needs 49 days to be born. Now that 15 days have passed, it will appear in a month. Hearing such words, Xiao Yang's face looked better. If this news was true, then they still had a month to prepare. At that time, if they could grab an opportunity, it would naturally not be bad. Moreover, opportunities had always been something that could be encountered, but not sought. This time, they naturally could not let it slip away from their hands. Treasures had always been owned by those who were virtuous. As long as they could snatch it, it would be theirs. Hearing this, Xing Tian also laughed. It seemed that this came at the right time. However, he also knew that the auspicious signs this time were very heavy. The news had also spread out. When the treasure appeared, it would also be extraordinary. At that time, cultivators from all over would be envious. At that time, the commotion caused by it would also be extraordinary. Therefore, it wasn't easy to snatch an opportunity from the hands of so many powerful cultivators. Moreover, this was someone else's territory. Chapter 2933. I wonder if there have been any changes in the Mingxin sect recently? Xiao Yang thought about it and asked. What he was most concerned about now was the attitude of the Mingxin sect. Now he was even more afraid of whether the other party would start a war with the flowing cloud world because of Mingjun. This was also the main reason why Xiao Yang came to the Bright Curse world this time. He had to be sure about this. If the other party really had such thoughts, then he would beat the other party until they did not dare to make a move. Xiao Yang was not an unreasonable person. It was just that the flowing cloud world was too weak now and could not bear this. Therefore, no matter how much risk there was, he could only take the initiative to break it one by one. Only in this way could he protect the safety of his own world. This could be considered as a last resort. The shop owner thought for a while and said, Everything is normal at the Mingxin sect. However, a month ago, for some reason, the sect master who was still in seclusion came out. Xiao Yang and Xing Tian looked at each other and nodded. They already understood that since the sect master came out, he must have sensed Ming Jun's failure. That was why he did this. In this case, this matter was worth haggling over. The sect master of the Mingxin sect is really lucky. Not long after he came out of seclusion, he encountered such an auspicious sign. I'm afraid it won't be long before he can break through the shackles and ascend to another level, the shop owner said enviously. As a cultivator who could reach the top. However, because of different reasons, although the shop owner was also a cultivator, he could only open a shop in such a remote place. While entertaining guests, he sought some benefits for himself as the necessary support for his cultivation journey. However, there were not many people who came to the Bright Curse world. Therefore, he only earned so much. It was even more difficult to take out a portion to offer to the city master. How could one not be envious of such an opportunity? When Xiao Yang heard this, he smiled and nodded. At the same time, he was also thinking about this matter. No matter how one looked at it, there were some coincidences. However, whether it was true or not, they would naturally be able to analyze it clearly after they arrived there and investigated it carefully. I heard that the Mingxin sect has a disciple from the outside world who is very powerful. I wonder if it's true or not. Xiao Yang asked indirectly. After all, if some questions were asked too clearly, it would inevitably raise suspicions. Moreover, the people who sold the information were very sensitive to these things. If they sensed something, they would probably head to the bright deity sect in the next moment and start reselling. You're Ming Jun. This person's talent is indeed extraordinary. He had broken through to the Sixth Order Martial King realm in such a short time, and he was even the sovereign's personal disciple. His limelight can be said to have overshadowed the younger generation of our entire bright curse world, the shopkeeper said with some displeasure. In the eyes of the shopkeeper, their huge bright curse realm was actually suppressed by an outsider. What was going on? Ming Jun has been in seclusion for many years. I think he's trying to break through to the Seventh Order, the shopkeeper said. Xiao Yang was still smiling calmly when he heard this. Since the news of Ming Jun's death had not spread, then presumably, when Ming Jun had returned to the Inflame world, he had not revealed any news. Until now, there had been no news. Even the locals did not know. The Ming Xin sect must have covered it up well. It's a pity that Ming Jun isn't from our bright curse world. Therefore, no matter how talented he is, he can't learn the secret techniques of the Ming Xin sect. Even if he's the sovereign's personal disciple, no matter how high his achievements are in the future, he can only be an outer elder, the shopkeeper said. Their bright curse world had always paid more attention to bloodlines. Moreover, they had many techniques that required the compatibility of bloodlines to be used. Therefore, as a Inflame world's Ming Jun, he could only get help in terms of resources. However, he could not learn any of those secret techniques. The restrictions of bloodlines were sometimes so harsh. No matter how talented you were, it was difficult to overcome them. No wonder, during the battle in the Inflame world, Ming Jun had used the methods of the Gathering Fire Alliance from beginning to end. In this way, many things made sense. It's indeed a pity, Xiaoyang said with a smile. The shopkeeper glanced at Xiaoyang and said, It seems that you admire Ming Jun a lot. Xiaoyang and Xing Tian immediately nodded, looking as if they had come to admire their idol. This depends on fate. If Ming Jun can break through to the next realm under this auspicious sign, you might be able to see him from afar. Otherwise, you won't have the chance, the shopkeeper said as he poured a cup of tea for himself. At the same time, the shopkeeper was thinking about what he should do next to turn these two big customers into fat sheep and let him have a good meal. Naturally, he couldn't directly kill them and steal their treasures. He was not stupid. As a martial emperor expert, he couldn't even see through the cultivation of the maid-like woman. The strength of these two people was probably even more unfathomable. If one didn't have some strength, how could they come out of the world to train? Therefore, the idea he thought of was nothing more than using information to fool them. Now he had grasped an important piece of information. These two people were very interested in Ming Jun. If he could collect some information from him, he might be able to sell it for a good price. However, their twin tiger city was too far away from the Ming Xin sect. It wasn't easy to get the latest news. How powerful is the sect leader of the Ming Xin sect? Xiaoyang asked. The shopkeeper nodded sincerely and said, The sect leader is the most powerful existence in the Ming Xin boundary. 1,000 years ago, he had already displayed a heaven-defying talent. It can be said that he is the youngest sect leader of the Ming Xin sect. Xiaoyang was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed. Which one of them wasn't a genius to be able to reach this stage? It was just that the sect leader of the Ming Xin sect was more outstanding among the geniuses. He was even more demonic. They had seen many geniuses among geniuses. It could even be said that they were used to it. In a certain world, one might be a genius. However, in the entire 3,000 middle worlds, it was impossible for one to be ranked in the 3,000 middle worlds. In fact, in comparison, one might not even be considered a genius. Originally, they wanted to find out the sect leader's cultivation realm from the shopkeeper. However, it looked like it would be in vain. Well, the sect leader's strength was well known. If they were to ask him directly, it would be a little abrupt. The shopkeeper only knew that these two guys were outsiders. He was also thinking about his own matters. Suddenly, Xiaoyang frowned and said, Shopkeeper, I'm curious about something. Sir, feel free to ask. As long as it's something I know, I'll tell you. The shopkeeper smiled. Xiao Yang nodded and lowered his voice. I heard that the Mingxin sect has a method to revive the dead. Is that true? Chapter 2934. The innkeeper's brows twitched involuntarily when he heard this. It was as if this question was difficult for him to answer at the moment. Xiao Yang and Xing Tian were both waiting for an answer in their hearts. They also needed this to confirm whether there was a possibility of Ming Jun coming back from the dead. Of course, the two of them had different goals. What Xiao Yang wanted was for Ming Jun to die. Only then would Ming Jun not attack the flowing cloud world, because he was unable to shake Xiao Yang. As for Xing Tian, his goal was very simple. He wanted to win. As long as he won this battle, everything would be easy to discuss. If he couldn't, he would probably spend a very long time thinking about this problem until he achieved it. After hesitating for a long time, the innkeeper slowly opened his mouth. He also lowered his voice and said, I can't be sure about this. I only heard some rumors. Xiao Yang and Xing Tian were stunned for a moment. Then they understood. This technique must have always been a secret. How could it be revealed so easily? Therefore, most of the rumors circulating outside were probably just groundless rumors. It was difficult to believe that it was true. It is said that this is a secret technique of the Bright Deity sect. It is even listed as a forbidden technique. In the past, there was indeed an ancestor of the Bright Deity sect who was reborn using this technique. However, that matter was also rather mysterious. It was so old that it was difficult for anyone to investigate. The innkeeper muttered softly. Xiao Yang and Xing Tian nodded. In this case, it was not groundless rumors. It was probably true. It was understandable that the news of this technique would not be spread. It was just groundless rumors based on some situations. The other party's concealment would only make it more conspicuous. In addition, Ming Jun's position in the Bright Deity sect was very high. After he was killed in the Yin Flame world, the Bright Deity sect did not have any reaction. This point needed to be investigated. There was definitely something fishy going on. A proud disciple of the sect had died in battle outside, but the sect did not say anything. This was very strange. Moreover, there was another point. Since the Bright Deity sect leader had already come out of seclusion, but the news of Ming Jun's death did not spread. There was even no action. This was thought-provoking. On the other hand, the strange phenomenon that occurred at the Bright Deity sect made people pay more attention to it. They found it very strange. This is the Bright Deity sect's secret. How could outsiders know the truth? However, I still advise the three of you not to go out and inquire about this kind of information. If the people of the Bright Deity sect were to find out, I'm afraid all of you will be doomed. The shop owner raised his eyes and looked around. When he didn't see anyone, he lowered his voice and continued speaking. How could the Bright Deity sect turn a blind eye to a sect's secret technique being probed? It was as if a precious treasure was being spied on. Thank you for your advice. We understand. Please excuse us, Xiao Yang said with a wry smile, seeing how the shopkeeper was so fearful, not daring to say anything despite being so far away. It was clear that there was a problem. The Bright Deity sect was a large sect. It was normal for them to have pawns, fangs, and eyes everywhere. Such a colossus was indeed not to be trifled with. However, no matter how powerful the other party was, Xiao Yang would more or less pay them a visit. After all, Xiao Yang was still concerned about the other party's attitude towards the flowing cloud boundary. If they were in a situation where they didn't know anything, it would be too awkward. Immediately, the shopkeeper also gave a general explanation and sent the three of them back to their rooms. What the shopkeeper said was naturally that there were some taboos in the bright curse boundary. Once touched, the consequences would be very serious. Every world had different taboos. Therefore, the shopkeeper felt that it was better to make it clear. This child who had just come out to experience, although his realm was high, he was inexperienced. If he was not careful, he might lose his life. It wasn't that the shopkeeper was kind. He just felt that he would leave a good impression on the other party. When he came to the bright curse boundary in the future, he could take care of his business. As a businessman, he had to look at the interests. As long as it was something that was beneficial to him, he just had to do it. Why should he think so much? After returning to his room, Xiao Yang lay on the bed and began to ponder and organize some of the information he had obtained earlier. The current bright curse boundary was indeed powerful. It could be seen from the tip of the iceberg. Ming Jun's guardian was a 7th-level expert. Moreover, there were probably several such figures in the Bright God sect. In this way, he could roughly deduce the approximate strength of the Bright God sect. With Xiao Yang's current realm and strength, it was still very difficult to fight against them. It could even be said that it was almost impossible. However, some information still needed to be clarified before he could make a conclusion. When the time came, if the situation was really bad to the worst, he could borrow the power of the mountain river map and escape to the flowing cloud boundary. However, before that, he also needed to explore too many realms. Suddenly, Xiao Yang also sat up abruptly. He thought of a detail. That was, after he killed the old man in linen clothes, he didn't take his spirit and obtain some information from his spirit. Although Ming Jun was dead, his divine soul was still there. As long as his spirit was still there, how difficult would it be to seize a body and be reborn? If that was the case, then the resurrection technique was probably not that great of a technique. However, there were also many restrictions in taking over a body. It was easy to damage one's spirit and cause one's realm to regress. At the same time, it had high requirements for the other person's body. It was easy to be restricted. Xiao Yang immediately shook his head and smiled bitterly. Sometimes it was inevitable to be careless in calculations. The world was unpredictable. No matter what kind of situation it was hard to force it. It seems that Ming Jun's life is not destined to end, Xiao Yang said with a bitter smile. Perhaps there was a trace of Ming Jun's spirit in the Bright God sect. It was not impossible for it to help him be reborn after he died. This method was very brilliant. Many top sects had such methods. However, such methods were more expensive. If one wasn't rich enough, they wouldn't be able to support it. Moreover, with Ming Jun's talent, if the Bright God sect valued him enough, they might even give him an everlasting lamp. It was unknown how much memory Ming Jun could retain after he was reborn, and what the Bright God sect's attitude would be. It could be said that what Xiao Yang was afraid of now was not the dead Ming Jun. It was the Bright God sect behind him. The position of the Bright God sect was probably second to none in the Bright Curse boundary. If he made things difficult for them, no matter how he looked at it, it was not a wise choice. However, he had to do it. This made Xiao Yang very uncomfortable. Countless lines seemed to be intertwined. It was very difficult to straighten them out. He might have to cut them with a knife. Chapter 2935. Xiao Yang also shared the information that he had figured out with Xing Tian and told him about his inference. Since they were all on the same side, their goal could be considered to be the same. It was not a bad choice to cooperate for the time being. Xing Tian was now a 7th-level martial emperor. If he was willing to help, Xiao Yang would have a lot less trouble. I was also worried about this possibility before, but if the Ming-Xin clan's methods are only like this, I'm afraid they won't be so mysterious. Xing Tian frowned and said, "In the world of cultivators, as long as one reached the martial emperor realm, it was not difficult for one's soul to leave the body. It was just a piece of cake. However, although one could be reborn in this way, many things would be lost, such as the original realm. The realm would be inseparable from the person who was possessed. However, this method was not considered brilliant. It was even a little inferior. Many people disdained to use such methods. It was easy to go from frugal to extravagant, but difficult to go from extravagant to frugal. So we can only find out what kind of brilliant techniques the Bright Deity sect has after we go there." As Xing Tian said this, he also let out a heavy sigh. Xiao Yang nodded slightly. Moreover, this was just an inference. It was not accurate. However, after hearing Xing Tian's words, Xiaoyang became more and more determined. He wanted to see what kind of methods the Mingxin clan had. If he could get his hands on it, he might be able to leave a way out for himself. However, there were so many things here, and it wasn't so easy to find out what was going on. However, I heard that the atmosphere in the Bright Curse realm is unusual. We should try to keep a low profile here. Don't expose yourself when you are not fully confident, Xiaoyang said in a low voice. Xing Tian just laughed it off. He was not sure about this matter. If no one provoked him, it would be easy to deal with. If it was too much, no matter how good his temper was, he would still explode. No matter what, Xing Tian was still atop Almighty of a world. He had always been in a high position. How could he be easily bullied? However, Xing Tian's attitude quickly changed because he saw the person in front of him. Xiaoyang was the ruler of a world. How high was his ambition? Since he could endure it, why couldn't she? Sometimes, patience was not without reason. If one wanted to achieve great things, they had to do so. With their current strength, although they were considered overlords in the Bright Curse realm, there were many people who were stronger than them. I only have one purpose for coming to the Bright Curse realm. Xing Tian took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. Xiaoyang only smiled and nodded his head, then he left. Just now, Xing Tian's words could be considered a declaration. He only wanted to defeat Ming Jun. As for other matters, it was highly likely that he would not interfere. Of course, even if Xing Tian didn't make a move, Xiaoyang wouldn't mind. As long as Xing Tian didn't stab him in the back, it was enough. At the end of the day, there were still some issues with their identities, and many things couldn't be explained in a few words. In fact, the conflict between them had always been there, and it had never been resolved. This time, even if they were to travel together in the Bright Curse realm, it was only a temporary cooperation. Moreover, this cooperation had their own purposes. It just happened that they were traveling together, and they could barely take care of each other. That was all. After returning to his room, Xiaoyang thought about these things, and there were also many plans in his heart. Moreover, Xing Tian had always been astute, and his character was now passable. However, no one knew what he was thinking. In short, such a person had to be guarded against. Fortunately, in the long time that they were away, the Myriad Beast realm was also peaceful. No matter if it was Left Blind Side or the Flowing Cloud realm itself, they didn't find any heresy. This was the best. If they really wanted to fall out, Xiaoyang didn't mind playing with the current Xing Tian. In the next few days, Xiaoyang wasn't in a hurry to leave Twin Tiger City. Instead, he wandered around the city, and at the same time he inquired about some news about the Bright Curse realm. After all, this matter was of great importance. Naturally, he needed to plan before acting. He couldn't act recklessly. Moreover, Xiaoyang also liked to plan before acting. If he rushed in without knowing anything, he might fall into someone's trap without even knowing it. In the end, he might lose his life, listening to some cultivators' conversations or deliberately asking. Xiaoyang also learned a lot of information. The Bright Curse realm had never invaded others because they were arrogant enough. They felt that their own world's resources were rich enough, and there was no need to plunder others. Of course, it was their arrogance that made them feel that such methods were very inferior and were despised by others. It could be said that among the dozens of worlds around, the Bright Curse realm was considered one of the strongest, and its overlord position was unshakable. It was also because of this that the surrounding worlds didn't dare to provoke the Bright Curse realm. Naturally, they were safe and sound. The situation in the Bright Curse realm was also very clear. It was a confrontation between the North and the South. The Cursed God sect in the South and the Bright God sect in the North were on equal footing. Although there was no matcha between the two on the surface, the general trend of their sects was already entangled. There was even a rumor that the ancestors of the Cursed God sect and the Bright God sect were of the same origin. Later, because of disagreements, they each opened their own sects in the North and South. In the beginning, there were constant disputes and friction between the two sections. But later, as time passed, they gradually began to converge, and peace was restored. There were 3 sects under the 2 sections. The 2 sects and 3 sects could be said to be the top 5 forces in the bright curse realm. Compared to the 2 sects, the 3 sects were indeed slightly inferior. The gap was also a little big, but their respective positions were still unshakable. Although there were many sects and forces under them, most of them were openly and secretly attached to them. Of course, some sects or forces that didn't have the climate to rely on could only fend for themselves in the end. In a few days, Xiaoyang also had a concept of the forces in the bright curse realm. However, he did not know much about the bright deity sect. Twin Tiger City was in the southernmost part, and it was still a small city. Therefore, there wasn't much information that could be obtained. On this day, Xiaoyang had just returned, and the shop owner was standing in front of the door with a smile. Looking at his expression, it was as if he was deliberately waiting for Xiaoyang to return. Xiaoyang's expression also changed. It seemed that there was good news again. Chapter 29:36. Xiaoyang knew very well that the innkeeper in front of him was a real businessman. In terms of selling information, he was indeed not bad. Since he was able to wait here, it meant that he also understood a lot of psychology. Such a scheming person was indeed good. But unfortunately, he focused his energy on these things. If he could focus on cultivation, it would be different. But then again, everyone had their own strengths. For example, the 2 heroes of the Sun family were indeed not interested in cultivation, and their talent could only be said to be average. They were able to reach their current realm completely by relying on resources. But this did not prevent them from having the talent to rule the world. "It seems that the innkeeper has brought me good news today," Xiaoyang said with a smile. The innkeeper nodded solemnly and said, "My friend in the central continent sent me some news related to the person you want to know. So I waited here as soon as I heard the news." Now, the innkeeper was also thinking in his heart whether he should wait for the best price for the information he knew now. Perhaps he could sell it for a good price. In the next few decades, he could cultivate in peace even if he did not do business. However, this was just a thought. The business here still had to continue. After all, a small stream flowed for a long time. Cultivation burned money, so naturally the more the better. When Xiaoyang saw this, a trace of surprise flashed across his brows. It seemed that he had really underestimated this innkeeper. There was no doubt that he was well informed. "I just don't know if the news is true or false." Xiaoyang shook his head and smiled. It was possible for some people to casually fabricate things for their own benefits. However, even if the innkeeper in front of him was given the courage, he would not dare to do so. The reason was very simple. Lil Man was a martial emperor expert and had never concealed his aura, so the innkeeper should be able to sense it. Using fake news to fool cultivators who were more powerful than him was probably the same as courting death. Hearing this, the innkeeper's expression changed slightly, and he immediately said, "My friend has always been reliable. He won't talk nonsense. Moreover, how much income can I make? I rely on this to make a living, so I naturally won't dare to speak nonsense." Xiaoyang poured a cup of tea and nodded with a smile. That was how it was for a voice. Most of the time, they still needed to be honest with each other. If he were to spout nonsense, he might really lose his job. He might even lose his life. Now, no one dared to be so presumptuous and treat their own lives as a joke. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang had a rough idea of what was going on. "Tell me about it," Xiaoyang said. If the information was useful, it wouldn't be a problem to reward them. If the information was useless, then he could just give them some random information. However, the shop owner waved his hand and said, "Although I don't know if this news is true, you still need to pay first." From the shopkeeper's point of view, there was indeed an element of risk involved. However, if he didn't dare to take any risks, how could he make a fortune? Xiaoyang frowned slightly. Looking at the other party's confident expression, he couldn't help but laugh. Moreover, looking at this guy's appearance, It seemed like he wouldn't act until he saw a rabbit. Humans were all ingenious. Sometimes, even if it was just a little bit of cleverness, as long as it was used appropriately, the benefits that could be reaped would not be small. The news is related to young Master Ming Jun. The shopkeeper seemed to have grasped the mentality of these three outsiders and threw out another piece of important news. Hearing this, Xiaoyang couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Although they had gathered a lot of information these few days, there was very little information about the Ming Xin clan. Perhaps it was because this was the area covered by the cursed god clan's influence and information was blocked, so there wasn't much discussion. If the information is useful to me, I will naturally reward you. If you try to fool me, I'm sure you know the consequences. Xiaoyang said with a smile as he tossed out 5 spiritual stones. Looking at the 5 spirit stones arranged on the table, the shop owner swallowed a mouthful of saliva. From this kind of spending, he could see that this black-clothed young master was so generous. He was afraid that the power behind him was not simple. Then he nodded repeatedly. The shopkeeper knew very well that this kind of person was not to be trifled with. If he wanted to earn their reward, it would be a technical job. A few days ago, there was an auspicious sign in the territory of the Ming Xin clan. At that time, we only had a rough idea. Now, we have confirmed that the place where the auspicious sign appeared was the place where young Master Ming Jun cultivated 1000 End Peak. The shopkeeper said. Hearing this, Xiaoyang frowned. The place where the auspicious sign appeared was Ming Jun's cultivation place. This meant that the Ming Xin clan might really have some tricks up their sleeves. Perhaps the auspicious sign was the strange phenomenon of Ming Jun's rebirth. As such, Xiaoyang was even more curious. What kind of brilliant method could actually achieve this? From this, Xiaoyang could also obtain more information. He deduced that the Ming Xin clan had not shown any attitude and did not even say a word to the outside world. They were probably doing something for Ming Jun's rebirth. It wasn't that the Ming Xin clan was magnanimous and did not find trouble with Princess Mingzhu and Xiaoyang. Instead, they placed all their attention on Ming Jun's rebirth. After Ming Jun came back from the dead, everything that happened in the Yin Flame world would naturally be explained clearly. Why would they still need to send people to investigate? It was not that they did not want to settle their grudges, but it was not the time yet. Suddenly, Xiaoyang could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. The Ming Xin clan was undoubtedly a huge monster. Once it moved, how terrifying would it be? Xing Tian's face was filled with joy. In his opinion, as long as Ming Jun was still alive, then he could win back the match that he lost. And this would no longer be a regret. Xiao Man only had a vague understanding of these matters. However, looking at the young master's solemn face, she knew that this matter was not easy to resolve. She immediately felt helpless. Just this bit of information, and you want to get so much reward money. That's not right, Xing Tian said with a smile. Moreover, they would go to the Ming Xin clan sooner or later. It was only a matter of time before they found out about this news. Previously, Xiaoyang was too generous. It was inevitable that this shop owner felt that this was a fat sheep waiting to be slaughtered. He could make a fortune off of him. Of course, I don't dare to accept the reward money with this bit of information. Similarly, I have an even bigger piece of information that will definitely not disappoint the three of you. When I do business, I have always been honest, the shop owner said with a smile. Chapter 2937. Xing Tian nodded with a smile. If this was all that the inn owner took out, he would teach this greedy personal lesson even without Xiaoyang falling out with him. Xiaoyang was also interested. It seemed that this inn owner knew a lot. And for him to be so serious, the news he knew must be true. It might be some big news that could alarm the bright curse world. Otherwise, the other party wouldn't be so serious. If the news is suitable, you will naturally be rewarded, Xiaoyang said coldly. The inn owner immediately began to nod and bow. With such a statement, his heart naturally calmed down a lot. At the same time, he also understood a principle. One was playing the good cop, and the other was playing the bad cop. He had to serve them well and not make any mistakes. Our bright curse world has always had a secret realm. The opening time is not fixed. It may open at any time. The inn owner lowered his voice and said, Shuanghu City was at the edge of the bright curse world. News had never been circulated. After all, people came and went. Other than outsiders, the locals rarely stayed here. If the inn owner didn't have a few brothers and sisters everywhere and kept in contact with them, the news wouldn't be circulated like this. It was also because of this that the inn owner's Yunfeng was able to do well and become the #1 inn in Shuanghu City. It was famous far and wide. It could be said that the Yunfeng made money mostly from the returning customers. Xiao Yang and Xing Tian looked at each other. Suddenly they were interested. It seemed that their luck was good this time. They encountered the opening of the secret realm as soon as they arrived. But at the same time, they also linked the auspicious omen of the 1,000-ceasing peak with the opening of the secret realm. Were these two things a little abrupt? Or perhaps it was a coincidence. As for the real reason, it was really thought-provoking. Was there some kind of cooperation between the two? Or was it that person from the Bright Deity sect? Thinking of this, Xiao Yang and Xing Tian were both pondering in their hearts. They felt that this matter was very complicated, but it wasn't easy to explain it clearly. So now they could only think about it slowly and ponder over it slowly. The opening time is not fixed. Xing Tian suddenly grasped the details and asked, if that was the case, it would be too much of a coincidence for these two things to happen together. If there was no one controlling it, it would be really hard to explain this matter clearly. The shopkeeper nodded and said, the opening of the mystic realm has never been fixed. Furthermore, the Bright Day mystic realm has always been the biggest mystic realm in the Bright Curse realm. It is also the place with the most opportunities. It can be said that those who can walk out of the daylight mystic realm will obtain opportunities and soar into the sky. As he spoke, the shopkeeper's eyes were filled with anticipation. If he could enter the daylight secret realm, that would be a great thing. If he was able to find 1 or 2 more fortuitous encounters, then he would be able to leave this place and no longer do those shameless things, and he would be able to cultivate in peace. However, reality was very cruel. With his current strength and cultivation, wanting to enter it was undoubtedly a fool's dream. It was simply impossible. Xiao Yang and Xing Tian smiled helplessly. They knew that this matter couldn't be explained in a few words. I think it's not that easy to enter the daylight mystic realm, Xiao Yang said in a deep voice. The shopkeeper nodded and said, if you want to enter the daylight mystic realm, you need to be above the martial emperor realm. Therefore, I have no chance. After saying that, the shopkeeper's eyes were filled with loneliness. Of course, if there is an almighty leading the way, you can enter at any cultivation level. For example, I can only be considered a wild cultivator. How can I enter? The shopkeeper said. His tone was filled with helplessness. Without a backer, he could only cross the river by feeling his way through many things. Such an encounter could be said to be very bad. However, the rule that all martial emperors can enter is only limited to the cultivators of the Bright Curse realm. If the cultivators from the outside world want to enter, it won't be easy, the shopkeeper said. His tone became much more serious. When Xiao Yang heard that, he immediately frowned. As expected, nothing went smoothly. No matter how open the Bright Curse realm was, how could they allow outsiders to enter their own backyard to search for opportunities without any hindrance? Their own opportunities could not be too much, but they could not share them with others. Xing Tian shook his head helplessly. At the same time, he had an idea in his mind, and that was to barge in by force. With his and Xiao Yang's strength, as long as they were a little careful, it was naturally doable. As long as they entered the mystic realm, everything would be easy. If the 3 of you can enter the daylight mystic realm, your chances of meeting young Master Mingjun will naturally be much higher, the shopkeeper said. Xiao Yang and Xing Tian did not take this to heart. Instead, they were thinking about other things. How to enter the mystic realm was the most important thing. If we go, I'm afraid we can only watch helplessly, Xiao Yang said. The shop owner waved his hand and said, All this while the entrance to the Daylight secret realm has been guarded by the Cursed God sect and the Ming God sect. If you can enter as a guest elder of one of the sects, you can naturally enter. It had to be said that this arrangement was indeed very appropriate. After all, if those outsiders wanted to enter, it would be difficult to stop all of them. However, if the quota was distributed to the various sects, it would also be able to form a relationship. This was considered a good choice. It could only be said that the arrangement was in place. Moreover, the reason why the Bright Curse realm was so powerful was also partly because of this place. Everyone wanted to obtain opportunities. With such a goal in mind, if they stayed here for a long time, they might join the Bright Curse realm. If the opportunities they obtained were too great, they would also feel the benefits of the Bright Curse realm. Naturally, they would not leave and would even wait for the next opening of the Mystic realm. After all, there was no limit to the number of times one could enter the Mystic realm. As long as one lived long enough, they could enter the Mystic realm when it opened. Which sects have such authority? Xiao Yang asked in a deep voice. This was the most important point. It would be best if they could enter within the rules. If they barged in forcefully, the final result would be that they would become enemies with the entire Bright Curse realm. In this way, it was not considered a good plan. It could even be said to be a bad one. It would offend everyone. In the end, it would evolve into a situation of world war. It was all possible. The 2 sects, 3 sects, and 4 major cities all have such authority, the shopkeeper said. Although Xiao Yang had heard some news about the 4 major cities, their strength seemed to pale in comparison to the previous ones. Their reputation was also not that high. Therefore, they seemed to be a little behind. However, their strength was not necessarily weaker than the 3 sections. Moreover, the 4 major cities were restricted by region. Chapter 2938. Most of the 4 cities controlled some areas around the city. Moreover, their forces were relatively complex, so their actions were naturally somewhat restrained. For example, the 2 sects and the 3 clans could set up subordinate clans, and there were many subordinates. In this way, the difference between the 2 was very clear. Xiao Yang and the other 2's temporary target was the Bright Deity sect. However, the relationship between the Cursed Deity sect and the Bright Deity sect was even more complicated. If they went to seek help from the Bright Deity sect, they might even lose their lives. It was obvious which was more important. As for the 3 sects, they were the main forces that absorbed foreign cultivators. To a large extent, they were able to emerge as a new force to be reckoned with due to the benefits they received from foreign cultivators. There was probably no place for them in the 3 clans. If they wanted to take it by force, it might cause some trouble. Now that they were not sure of the Bright Deity clan's attitude, it was better to be cautious. After all, there were many things that couldn't be explained so easily. Therefore, the only choice they had was the 4 cities. Choosing which city to cooperate with naturally became the most pressing matter for Xiao Yang at the moment. How much do you know about the 4 cities? Xiao Yang frowned and asked. Hearing this, the shop owner smiled. He knew that they would definitely ask him this question. Everyone wanted to enter the secret realm to search for treasures and find their own opportunities. However, how could all of this be easy? In the Bright Curse world, if one did not have the support of the local forces, even if one was a dragon crossing the river, one would have to obediently wait. Unless one's strength was strong enough to go against an entire world, there was naturally no need to worry about this. One could just barge in. However, there were only a handful of people who could do this. It could even be said that it was completely impossible. Therefore, no matter what they did, there seemed to be no perfect answer. Therefore, other than relying on the local forces, they had no other choice. The 4 cities each have their advantages and disadvantages. However, with the current situation, the 3 of you can try your luck at Nangong City, the shop owner said. Now that they were in the south, they were naturally the closest to Nangong City. If he could make a decision directly, it would save him a lot of time and trouble. After all, There was no fixed time for the secret realm to open. It was hard to say when it would close. Therefore, if they could enter earlier, they would be able to rest easy. Of course, it was better to do it as soon as possible. Furthermore, Nangong City's forces were the weakest among the 9 forces, and many outsiders would not choose to rely on them. Otherwise, if something went wrong, they wouldn't have enough confidence. Of course, there were also people who wanted to go to Nangong City to pick up the loot. However, the city lord of Nangong City was not stupid. There were some people who did not have enough strength, so why waste their spots? City Lord Nangong has always been a straightforward person. Regardless of how you look at it, it's obviously the best choice to ask him for a fortunate encounter, said the shop owner. The shop owner also had his own plans. If these 3 outsiders really settled down in Nangong City, he might even be able to repay his kindness in the future. That was how business was expanding from the connections of friends. If he succeeded, the benefits he could earn in the future would naturally be unimaginable. Regarding this, the shop owner was very confident in his heart. Thank you, shop owner. If there is such good news in the future, please do not hesitate to let me know, said Xiaoyang as he threw 5 spiritual stones to the shop owner. Looking at the 5 spirit stones, the shop owner subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. These 3 customers were really rich and overbearing. Their actions were very satisfying. If you are trying to fool us with fabricated stories, you should know that I don't mind spending more money to make you unable to stay here any longer, said Xiaoyang as his voice suddenly turned colder. The shop owner could not help but shiver as he felt a strong murderous intent. Of course, doing business is the way to go in the long run, said the shop owner as he trembled in fear. These people only had good tempers on the surface. However, when they really do make a move, they would definitely be ruthless. Then, after asking more about Nangong City, Xiaoyang returned to his room and began to ponder about this matter. The opening of the secret realm of daylight was indeed very tempting to him. At the same time, he was also trying to figure out the situation of the Mingxin sect. If the Mingxin sect was not prepared to attack the flowing cloud world, then Xiaoyang naturally did not mind becoming friends with them. If they wanted to continue entangling with them for the safety of the flowing cloud world, even if he had to make a big fuss, so what? Thinking of this, Xiaoyang's eyes became more determined. Since the secret realm of daylight had already opened, in the following period of time, even if Mingjun was reborn, they would not be able to focus on revenge. After all, the opening of the secret realm had always been uncertain. These people naturally would not let such a great opportunity slip away from their hands. As such, the choice was no longer a problem. First, he would go to the secret realm of daylight to take a look. Who knows, he might be able to obtain some opportunities. Moreover, opportunities were hard to describe. If one's luck was good, they might end up smashing their own feet when they walked out. It was hard to say. Moreover, if a cultivator wanted to grow, he had to rely on bitter cultivation. Even if the seas ran dry and the rocks crumbled, it might not be of much use. If one did not have luck and opportunities, no matter how talented one was, it would be difficult to go far. Only by stacking opportunities could a person reach the peak. At the same time, Xiaoyang began to organize the information in his mind. He began to think about how he could obtain the token to enter the secret realm from Nangong City. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang felt a headache coming on. The entrance of the secret realm was guarded by the powerful figures of the Mingxin sect and the Cursing Xin sect. They would most likely wait until the secret realm was about to close before entering. As such, if they wanted to do something, the success rate would not be too high. They might even cause more trouble. As such, the final result would be a loss that would not be worth it. Moreover, these 2 sects were in charge of the north and south, respectively. Once they offended them, the entire Mingxin sect would hunt them down. They might even bring disaster to the flowing cloud world. No matter what the situation was, Xiaoyang could not accept it. Therefore, to be able to enter the secret realm through gentle means was the safest way. However, It was easier said than done for an outsider like him to obtain the token. Chapter 2939. This did put Xiao Yang in a difficult position, but he felt that some things could still be discussed. As long as he was willing to pay a high price, why would he have to worry about not being able to get the badge? Besides, for the weak, it was true that they would have to pay a high price to get the badge. However, for the strong, they were respected by everyone and admired by many. Why would they want to befriend them? With this thought in mind, Xiao Yang's heart calmed down a lot. As long as there was a limit in his heart, everything would be fine. Following this, Xiao Yang did not waste any more time. He called Xiao Man and Xing Tian and headed straight to Nangong City. As they were leaving, the owner was extremely attentive, as if he already knew that Xiao Yang and the other two were leaving and had already arranged everything. This store owner was really good at doing business. When Xiao Yang left, he returned all the extra money he had paid for the room without missing a single cent. Although that amount of silver was nothing, the feeling it gave off was completely different. From the owner's point of view, a reward was just a reward. Buying and selling information was an independent business. As for the accommodation, it was something else entirely. As long as the customer was satisfied with every payment, he would not be afraid that they would not stay at his place when they came to the drifting cloud boundary again. The owner even gave them a map of the bright curse boundary as a gift and a way for him to win their hearts. Xiao Yang and the others were indeed lacking a map, so they accepted it politely. As for the remaining rooms, they treated them as a reward to the owner and did not take any more. After leaving Shuanghu City, the three immediately executed their techniques and headed straight to Nangong City. Nangong City was located in the south and was over 10,000 miles away from Shuanghu City. They still needed to head to the central region, so time was considered tight. They would only be able to calm down if they were able to enter the mysterious ground earlier. If they were to miss this opportunity, it would be too late for regrets. Opportunities were mysterious to begin with. No one knew when they would encounter one. Once they missed it, it would not be easy for them to encounter it again. A great opportunity was better than hundreds of years of cultivation, or even thousands of years. Even those cultivators who had been lost for a long time might have the opportunity to break through their shackles and advance further. The importance of opportunities was extraordinary in the hearts of every cultivator. It was something that could only be chanced upon and not sought. There were many uncertain factors, but it made countless people scramble for it. After all, you might not necessarily gain anything if you went, but if you didn't go, then there would be no possibility at all. If one's luck was good and encountered a fortuitous encounter that belonged to him, then he would definitely soar into the sky with an unstoppable momentum. In the past, I have indeed heard of the Daylight Secret Realm. The last time it opened was 3,000 years ago. Now that it has opened again, we are lucky to have encountered it, Xing Tian said with a smile. Previously, he had obtained the Horned Dragon's inheritance. This time, if he could obtain another opportunity in the Secret Realm, he believed that the speed of his growth would be even faster. Perhaps if he were to break through to a higher realm and consolidate his strength, he might even be able to defeat Xiao Yang. Xiao Yang nodded. With Xing Tian's words, he was certain that this opportunity was real. However, how to hold it in his hands was also a very big problem. Although it means that the spell realm is not exclusive, the Daylight Secret Realm is their root. It won't be easy for us to get the token to enter from them, Xing Tian said in a deep voice. In this aspect, Xing Tian was more clear about it. In Xing Tian's opinion, there was no need to waste time in Nangong City. They just had to go to the entrance of the Secret Realm. With their strength, as long as they joined forces, they might not be able to break through a hole to enter the Secret Realm. As for the consequences, Xing Tian didn't think too much about it. Anyway, he felt that, at most, he would be hunted down by the Light Spell Realm. With Xiao Yang's Tongshin Gate, he could just escape when the time came. It was not impossible for him to come back and seek revenge when he was strong enough in the future. Moreover, if he entered the Secret Realm and found another opportunity to break through, He, Xingtian, would not be afraid of the light spell realm's experts after he came out. We have to give it a try. It's better to keep a low profile, Xiaoyang instructed. Xingtian was born as a ferocious beast. Although he was considered quick-witted, most of the time, he relied on his instincts to make decisions. This was also a characteristic of the myriad beast realm. Sometimes, problems that could be solved with brains were too troublesome in their eyes, so they only wanted to solve it with their fists. Xiaoyang also felt helpless about this. In the past, he felt that this was very comfortable and gave him an opportunity to take advantage of. But now, Xingtian was barely considered a companion. Thinking about it this way, it didn't feel so good. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang shook his head, helplessly. Xingtian just smiled indifferently. He didn't take it to heart. In Xingtian's opinion, since Xiaoyang could stir up chaos in the myriad beast realm and even suppress the Yin Flame realm, this was not something that could be done with pure strength. Without enough planning, no matter how strong he was, he would probably be trapped in a quagmire and sulk to death. So next, he only needed to listen to Xiaoyang's arrangements. Why worry too much? Xiao Man followed behind, feeling a little worried in her heart. In her opinion, this trip to the Bright Curse realm had not caused any disturbances so far, but there would probably be a lot of problems later. Soon, Xiao Man's heart no longer had these thoughts, because, in her opinion, as long as the young master was there, then all the problems would not be a problem. With the young master's ability, settling these matters would be a piece of cake. It had always been like this. Her young master was so proud and had always been in an invincible position. Thinking of this, Xiao Man no longer worried. In her opinion, this matter was just like that. Why continue to worry about it? The three of them had different thoughts, but there was only one backbone among them. The reason why Xingtian was so bold was that he valued Xiaoyang's character. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dragged Xiaoyang along on this trip to the Bright Curse realm. If Xiaoyang wanted to harm him, Xingtian was not stupid and could naturally see the clues. But he believed that Xiaoyang could reach where he was today. It was absolutely impossible for him to betray his friends for glory. As for their positions and differences, now that there was no one else present, they could put it aside for the time being. In the future, they might represent their respective realms to fight again, but the current situation would not change. Just like how Xiaoyang could help blind left and blind right to grow up, he did not completely control them. Instead, he let them be his eyes and ears and did nothing. Soon, they saw the outline of Nangong City. Chapter 2940. The Nangong City covered a huge area with a circumference of a few hundred miles, showing how huge the city was. Although the city walls were not tall enough to reach the clouds, they were not low either. With a height of over 10 zhang, they could barely see the buildings in the city from high up in the air, which were of different heights, but looked extremely luxurious. As they approached the Nangong City, the three immediately landed on the ground and walked into the city. If they were to fly straight into the city, it would be disrespectful to the Nangong City. Since they were the ones asking for help, they could not afford to be arrogant. Otherwise, not only would they fail to obtain the badge, they might even be hunted down. That was not their goal. It would be best if they could live in harmony. Of course, it would be best if they could enter the mystical ground openly. It would be too risky to barge in with brute force. Although Xingtian was not afraid of the risks, as he believed that the greater the risk, the greater the reward. However, their ultimate goal was to enter the realm of light. Therefore, they would be able to bear with it for a while. Why would they want to cause any trouble? The entrance of the Nangong City was guarded by over 10 guards in metal armor. However, they only stood on both sides and scanned the area without investigating. The Bright Curse realm had always been peaceful, and there were rarely any disturbances. Therefore, these guards were only standing guard here symbolically. That being said, if anything were to happen, it would be easier for them to handle it here, preventing the situation from getting worse. These guards were not weak at all, as they were all cultivators of the Qingwu realm. Therefore, it was obvious that the Nangong City had a strong background. As they entered the city, Xiao Man felt uncomfortable being stared at by the guards and subconsciously lowered her head. It was not that Xiao Man was scared as a martial dominator, but that she did not want to cause any trouble for her master. Therefore, it was fine for her to bear with it. The guards did not purposely make things difficult for them. They did not even interrogate them and allowed them to enter the city. Furthermore, they had been guarding the place for many years. Thus their eyesight was not too bad. Therefore, they could tell that the robe that Xiaoyang was wearing was not ordinary. It was better not to provoke someone like him. If they were not careful one day, they might even lose their lives. It was also because of this caution and turning a blind eye that these dozen or so people were able to stay in this place. Otherwise, they would have lost their lives long ago. So what if they had the city lord's mansion behind them? It was impossible for the city lord's mansion to protect them all the time. Cultivators had endless methods to kill people. What's next? Xingtian asked. Now that they had entered Nangong City, their main goal was to obtain the badge. In Xingtian's opinion, it didn't matter how he obtained it or what methods he used. As long as he could achieve his goal, what did anything else matter? Go directly to the city lord's mansion to pay a visit, Xiaoyang said solemnly. At the same time, Xiaoyang was a little worried. If the city lord of Nangong City had already left for the secret realm, not only would they end up empty-handed, they might even delay their plan. Xingtian shrugged helplessly. He felt that Xiaoyang's actions were not feasible. After all, these people were used to being in high positions. If they were to receive visitors every once in a while, they would be too busy. Therefore, it was almost impossible to meet the city lord through normal means. Try peaceful means before resorting to force. This way, even if we were to fight, we would have a reason to do so. Xiaoyang said calmly. Xingtian nodded with a smile. He naturally understood the tricks of human cultivators. However, deep down he felt that these tricks were useless. In the realm of beasts, they only worshipped the strong. As for the so-called etiquette, they did not care about it all. Xiaoyang could tell what Xingtian was thinking, but he did not say anything. Instead, he quickened his pace and headed toward the city lord's mansion. The streets of Nangong City were paved with precious stones. Perhaps these stones were nothing to them, but in the flowing cloud world, such an expense was not something that could be easily afforded. After all, this was a middle realm, rich in resources. It was many times better than the drifting cloud realm. Moreover, the flowing cloud realm was only a new realm. It was still a bit of a stretch to compare it to a middle realm. However, the God realm was different. The layout there was much better than Nangong City. The God realm was a special realm, which was why it was different. The streets were crowded with people, and the sounds of hawking could be heard. The things they were selling were not ordinary. Even some spiritual herbs of decent quality were being peddled by the other party on the roadside. Xiaoyang only took a glance at it. If he had extra time, he wouldn't mind going over to ask and take a look. He was an expert in pill alchemy. If he bought more herbs, he would be able to make more pills. However, Xiaoyang did not have much time for pill alchemy. Most of the time, he did not have the time to do these things. However, in the future, he would have plenty of time in the vast Milky Way. Sometimes he could tell the quality of the herbs just by looking at their smell. He even took a fancy to some of them, but he did not ask about them. At the same time, he was thinking about the information given to him by the owner of the Yunfengyan. The city lord of Nangong City had always been generous. If he was given enough benefits, it would not be difficult for him to get a badge. However, that was only a rumor from the outside world. It was likely that those ungenerous things were not spread out. Everyone had two sides to them. This was an undeniable fact, and it was not something that could be confirmed with just a few words. After all, without actually interacting with the other party, the rumors were just rumors and could not be taken seriously. Young master, it's so lively here. Xiao Man looked around curiously. Women were always curious about these things. Furthermore, ever since Xiao Man ascended to the upper realm, she had spent most of her time cultivating in seclusion in her room. Now that she saw such a lively place, she could not help but feel curious and excited. "You can walk around. I'll come find you after I'm done with my business," Xiao Yang said softly. Xiao Man shook her head. Although she was reluctant to part with some of the trinkets, she knew that it was safest to follow the young master. Furthermore, if the young master needed anything, she could do it for him. The young master was her world. Xiao Yang shook his head helplessly. Xiao Man, this girl had always been like this. Although he felt guilty, Xiao Yang did not let her go play by herself. After all, there were many experts in Nangong City, and many of them were stronger than Xiao Man. Xiao Man would not cause trouble, but it did not mean that things would not come to her. Chapter 2941. Xing Tian also had a different opinion of this pair of master and servant. Most of the time, he could not understand the reason behind it. "Xiao Man, just go ahead. If you're scared, I'll accompany you," Xing Tian said with a smile. Xing Tian felt that Xiao Man's culinary skills were not bad. If he wanted to eat her cooking in the future, he naturally had to protect her and leave a good impression. Today was a good opportunity for him to curry favor with her. However, Xiao Man shook her head like a rattledrum and directly rejected Xing Tian's good intentions. Xing Tian was also helpless. He couldn't force Xiao Naughty to play, right? Furthermore, Xiao Yang was still standing there. He did not have the guts to do so. Because they purposely quickened their pace, it still took them half an hour to reach the entrance of the city lord's mansion. At a glance, the city lord's mansion gave off a domineering feeling. Although it was not dazzling, the simple and generous decorations revealed a noble aura. Even the two large stone lions at the entrance were carved out of extremely precious stones. If they were placed in the 3,000 small worlds, these two seemingly useless stone lions would probably attract a lot of attention and even become a symbol of status. That stone lion could also be considered a heaven-grade magical artifact. Sure enough, the city lord's mansion was rich. They had placed 2 magic tools at the entrance. How could they have done such an extravagant act if they didn't have a little bit of confidence? This is the city lord's mansion. Outsiders are not allowed to enter. At this moment, a guard saw the 3 of them walk over and immediately scolded them. Because Xiao Yang and Xing Tian suppressed their auras and Xiao Man looked like a servant, the guard did not take them seriously and thought that they were just ordinary people. Even if they had some cultivation, it was nothing. After all, there were many powerful people in the city lord's mansion. For Nangong City to be one of the 2 sects, 3 clans, and 4 cities, it naturally had its own strengths. "Little brother, we have some matters that we would like to discuss with the city lord. I hope you can make an exception for us." Xiao Yang cupped his fists and smiled. However, the guard looked at them with disdain. Every day, there would be people who would use the excuse of having matters to discuss with the city lord. However, those were just idiots who wanted to build a relationship with him and fantasize about soaring to the sky. The city lord is not free. The guard rejected directly. Hearing this, Xing Tian almost burst out laughing. Xiao Yang's attitude was too polite. It was inevitable that these people would think that they were ordinary and could be manipulated at will. It was human nature to bully the weak and fear the strong. Many people were even more vivid on this point. Xiao Yang was also well versed in the human heart, so he naturally knew what the other party was thinking. Then he gave Xiao Man a look and Xiao Man understood. Immediately, the guard felt an immense pressure. Even his hands and legs began to tremble uncontrollably. It was clear that he was afraid. In an instant, the other guards also came back to their senses. The other party was just an expert who had deliberately suppressed his realm. He was not as weak as they thought. "Almighty Martial Emperor, please spare my life. I will go and report this," the guard said hurriedly. Hearing this, Lil Man retracted his pressure. Then the guard rushed into the city lord's mansion as if he had been pardoned. It was as if he was afraid that if he stayed any longer, he would lose his life here. "These brats are just like that. I think it is almost impossible for you to enter the city, Lord's mansion, in the name of paying a visit. Xing Tian laughed. Xiao Yang smiled and nodded. He also saw through this. From some details, it was enough to see what the atmosphere was like in this place. If these guards could be so domineering, it was obvious that their superiors were the same. These brats were really difficult to deal with. When Xing Tian saw that Xiao Yang knew but still did this, he could not help but feel puzzled. This was completely unreasonable. Wasn't doing such meaningless things a waste of time? Xing Tian could not understand Xiao Yang's so-called reason. It was simply superfluous. Xiao Yang stood calmly at the side, as if he was waiting for news from the other party. Previously, the guards had been suppressed by Xiao Man's pressure, so they did not dare to look too presumptuous. These martial emperors were not people they could afford to offend. However, the guards felt disdain in their hearts. With such strength, they wanted to curry favor with the city lord's mansion. Wasn't it a little wishful thinking? Moreover, looking at their respectful behavior before, they were probably just low-level martial emperors. Their strength was not too outstanding, so they took the initiative to curry favor. If they were really strong, they would have come arrogantly. Or perhaps the city lord had already sent them an invitation. Why would they take the initiative to pay a visit? Xiao Yang looked at the bustling crowd outside and shook his head with a bitter smile. When would the flowing cloud realm be able to see such a prosperous scene? Although Xiao Yang felt that this was a certainty, time was a big problem. For a world to be prosperous, it needed a lot of wealth. The flowing cloud world was originally poor. Even after reaching the middle world, the situation had changed. However, there was still a long way to go to reach the level he wanted. It could even be said that Xiao Yang had brought the flowing cloud world to a height that it did not belong to. That was why it was struggling to make ends meet and could not compete with the other middle worlds. Xiao Man stood at the side and looked coldly at the city, lord's mansion. She did not expect the other party to be so arrogant. In the flowing cloud world, countless people begged Xiao Yang to be a guest. However, here they had to be humble. This difference was so great that it naturally made Lil Man feel a little resentful. However, Xiao Man was only a third-level martial emperor. Compared to the city, lord's mansion, the difference was not ordinary. Therefore, she could only follow the young master and did not dare to directly denounce them. As time passed, there was still no news from inside. Even the guards who went in to report had not returned. This made people somewhat unhappy. Xing Tian, on the other hand, was smiling very happily. It seemed like he had already made up his mind to see Xiao Yang suffer a setback. If they directly revealed their identities, perhaps one or two people who could speak up would come out and say something when the other party was aware of it. However, they had put themselves too low. In the eyes of those who were biting off more than they could chew, their attitude was so low that it was almost impossible to see. Very quickly, half an incense stick's time passed, and there was still no reply. Xiao Yang was more or less angry. Of course, he wanted to sit down and discuss things properly. However, the other party's attitude made him very unhappy. Chapter 2942. There were people coming and going outside the city lord's mansion, but Xiao Yang and the other two had been standing there for a long time, and now it was a little awkward. There were even some passers-by who started pointing at them, thinking that these three people were simply delusional. They wanted to enter the city lord's mansion, but they didn't even look at their own status. Was the city lord's mansion a place that anyone could enter? Throughout the year, who knew how many people used this method, saying that they had something important to see the city lord? But in the end, what was the result? They were all people who didn't have the ability and wanted to take a shortcut. And in the end, those people didn't have a good ending. Even if the city lord didn't say anything, his subordinates knew what to do. Xing Tian, on the other hand, was delighted because he felt that it was a joyous thing to see Xiao Yang miscalculate today. Although this matter didn't have a big impact, and could even be said to be a small matter that couldn't be any smaller, he felt comfortable and refreshed in his heart. Xiao Man also saw that the young master's expression was a little unhappy, and immediately understood. She stood out, looked at the few guards, and said in a cold voice, "Please send one more person to hurry up and see if the previous one is lost." As she spoke, Xiao Man released her pressure again, and a guard immediately stood out and quickly slipped in. Still dare to be unreasonable in the city lord's mansion. They really don't know how to write the word death. Yeah, they think they're great, just because they have a bit of strength. But they don't know that with just this bit of strength, how is it enough to look at in the city lord's mansion? For a time, many people stayed wanting to watch the show. Ever since the last time someone was killed for causing trouble, it had been many years since anyone dared to cause trouble to seek benefits. However, such a person actually appeared today. This made them want to take a good look. Watching a show, they never felt that it was a big deal. These people must be outsiders, so they don't know the immensity of heaven and earth and dare to come here to show off. I think so too. Who doesn't know that although the city lord is forthright, it doesn't mean that he can accept being teased. One after another, the outside of the city lord's mansion began to become lively again. Those guards saw that more and more people were gathering, and some began to drive them away. How dignified was the city lord's mansion! How could it allow these fellows to gather here? Under the hubbub of voices, it would be a sin to neglect the cultivation of the mighty figure in the manor. Of course, these people would disperse when the time came, but the guards wouldn't be able to escape. Therefore, they could only brace themselves and disperse them. The crowd quickly dispersed, but some of the restaurants around the city lord's mansion were overcrowded. Those that were a little closer all became very good places to watch the show. They were also very curious. They wanted to see how these outsiders would die. Xiao Yang only needed a glance to see the situation clearly. At the same time, he began to plan again. It seemed that it was impossible to enter the city lord's mansion with courtesy. At the very least, the current situation was enough to determine that it was impossible. Although the guards looked respectful on the surface, it was only fear under the pressure. It could be said that these people had the same mentality as the onlookers and were ready to see them make a fool of themselves. If he were to barge in directly, it would be somewhat unreasonable. At that time, if the city lord got angry again, who knows what kind of situation would occur. This was the awkwardness of asking for help. He had to take care of the other party's feelings as much as possible. If it weren't for the fact that he wanted to enter the secret realm of daylight safely, why would Xiao Yang do this? However, after the second guard went in, there were no signs of him coming out. This made everyone a little confused. Xiao Man frowned. Her young master was being looked down upon like this. Naturally, she was extremely unhappy. Then, she glanced at her young master and didn't act presumptuously. After all, she couldn't be impulsive about this matter. If she messed up her young master's plan, then she would be committing a great sin. However, Xiao Man didn't know that Xiao Yang's control of the situation was messed up. Even if it was messed up, it didn't matter. Are we going to continue waiting like this? Although Xing Tian also wanted to see a joke, he realized that he was also being laughed at by others. Therefore, Xing Tian couldn't stand it anymore. Standing there in a daze, it was as awkward as it could get. If they really couldn't, they could just barge into the city lord mansion and snatch a few tokens to enter the secret realm. However, there were many uncertainties in this. One wrong step could cause a huge uproar. Thinking of this, Xing Tian felt even more aggrieved. This couldn't go on. However, looking at Xiao Yang's calm and composed appearance, Xing Tian felt speechless. Only Xiao Yang would be able to remain so indifferent. After all, Xiao Yang was someone who was used to seeing storms. Although he was a little unhappy, it didn't mean that he would lose his sense of propriety because of this. Regarding this, he still had a good grasp of it. What else can we do? Unless Brother Xing Tian can fight against the entire Bright Curse realm or barge in and capture the city lord, you can go too. Xiao Yang said softly. Hearing this, Xing Tian could only shake his head helplessly. Xing Tian believed that he had the ability to kill a few rounds in Nangong City. However, It was impossible to capture the city lord or make an enemy out of the entire bright curse realm. With his current ability, he couldn't do it. Moreover, what was the point of making more enemies for no reason? No matter how much Xing Tian liked to fight, it didn't mean that he was stupid. Okay. I'll listen to you. Xing Tian shrugged helplessly. Xiaoyang just smiled. He felt that someone would come out soon, but the other party's attitude was predictable. After a while, an old man with a white beard walked out. Along with him were the two guards who went in previously. The two guards pointed at Xiaoyang and the other two, and seemed to be saying something. Xiaoyang wasn't in the mood to listen to what they were saying, because he knew that trouble was inevitable. Since that was the case, there was no need to say anything more. The old man glanced at Xiaoyang and Xing Tian, but didn't see anything special. Of course, he wasn't looking at familiar faces. There were only a few people who had interacted with the city lord's mansion. Naturally, he knew the experts in the bright curse realm. Since he hadn't seen the two men before, they weren't important. Perhaps they were just retainers. You're only a third-level martial emperor, and you dare to behave atrociously in front of the city lord's mansion. The old man suddenly yelled and stared at Xiao Man with anger between his brows. It was as if they had committed a grave offense. Chapter 2943. The aura that erupted from the old man was not ordinary either. It immediately shook Xiao Man's body and caused her to stagger and take half a step back. However, that was all. Xiao Man was not prepared and was suddenly shaken. That was why she was like that. However, when she steadied herself, she also showed a fearless side. Since they were all martial emperors, what was there to be afraid of? Moreover, the young master was behind her. Xiao Man was not afraid at all. However, the other party's strength was indeed stronger. Therefore, under such pressure, Xiao Man could only ensure that she was not completely suppressed. However, she wanted to resist, but it seemed that she did not have the strength to do so. At this moment, the restaurant that was packed with people was in an uproar. That girl can actually fight with Manager Qin as an equal. It seems that she is not an ordinary martial emperor. No wonder she is so arrogant and despotic. It seems that she does have some strength. However, Manager Qin is also an outer palace disciple. His cultivation can only be considered ordinary among those of the same realm. The people who were watching the show chattered nonstop. At the same time, they each insisted on their own opinions. They even felt that this big show would become very interesting to watch. If Xiaoyang and the others were directly killed by Manager Qin, they would only feel that it was within their expectations. There would not be much surprise. However, these three outsiders seemed to be somewhat ignorant of the immensity of heaven and earth. If they dared to fight back, they would violate the taboo of the city lord's mansion. At that time, no matter how talented they were, it would be difficult to avoid being killed. The city lord's mansion's face was still important. Moreover, the city lord's mansion's face was very important. If they let it go this time, there would probably be more and more people who would take risks in the future. Everyone was a shrewd person. Naturally, they would not allow more trouble to come in the future. They would only use these opportunities to make an example out of those who had other thoughts. They would only dare to take a look and not dare to scheme too much. Xiao Man gritted her teeth and persevered. At the same time, she also released her aura to fight against the other party. However, the other party's cultivation was higher, so it was a little difficult for her. Xiao Man did not care and continued to release her aura. It was as if she had reached a dead end and wanted to fight it out with her opponent. This girl is only a third-order martial king, but she can withstand my pressure. She has some skills. Manager Chen muttered in his heart, but there was a fierce glint in his eyes. If he couldn't suppress this little girl today, then there would be a lot of rumors in the residence in the future. Manager Chen took a step forward. Immediately, an even more powerful pressure surged out like a tidal wave, causing Xiao Man's body to tremble uncontrollably. However, Xiao Man was very stubborn. He wasn't afraid at all and quickly stabilized his Dao heart. You're just a third-order martial emperor. How dare you behave so atrociously in the city, Lord's mansion? Manager Qin shouted angrily and increased the pressure. As soon as these words were spoken, the surrounding crowd immediately went into an uproar. There were many martial emperors in the bright curse realm, but they were not common. Now that a stage 3 martial king had appeared at the entrance of the city lord's mansion, how could they not be surprised? Many people even felt that this matter was starting to get interesting. Perhaps it would become even more troublesome. So it's a stage 3 martial king. No wonder he's so confident. He came prepared. A stage 3 martial king is indeed very strong. If they talk nicely, they might even be able to enter the city lord's mansion as a guest. But now that they have a conflict with Manager Qin, the city lord's mansion is unable to get out of the embarrassing situation. Naturally, this matter cannot be resolved peacefully. Everyone laughed and chatted, and the conclusion was already set. These 3 outsiders still dared to resist under the questioning. If they were not convinced, then they were courting death. If they wanted to climb up the tree, they didn't even want to give up their dignity. They even wanted to fight back. If that wasn't courting death, what was it? Many people didn't think highly of these 3 outsiders. They felt that under the pressure of the city lord's mansion, they could only die in the end. In the end, they would even die a horrible death. The more they resisted, the more miserable their fate would be. Right now, it was just a confrontation of auras, and it was already like this. If Manager Qin made a move and they fought back, then the situation would change again, and it would even change out of control. You're just a stage 4 martial king, and you think you're a big shot? Xiao Yang, who had been silent for a long time, opened his mouth. The other party's attitude made him feel very unhappy and displeased. The reason why he didn't speak before was because he wanted Xiao Man to feel the aura of a stage 4 martial king. Xiao Man didn't have stage fright, nor did he retreat. Instead, he was prepared to fight back. Xiao Yang was also very satisfied with this approach. However, if they continued to fight, Xiao Man would definitely be injured. Therefore, at this limit, it was fine. As soon as he finished speaking, Manager Chen's chest felt as if he had been struck by a heavy blow. His entire body was shaken, and he staggered back. In the end, he couldn't stand still and fell to the ground. Immediately, the entire crowd was in an uproar. When the guards saw Manager Qin fall to the ground, they immediately became uncertain. What was going on? Was that black-robed youth really so powerful? With just a shout, he was able to make Manager Qin unable to withstand it? The onlookers were even more shocked. They all thought that Manager Qin would suppress this matter, but who would have thought that Manager Qin would actually fall? There's really a good show to watch. I didn't expect that youth's strength to be even stronger than Manager Qin. So what if he's strong? Offending Manager Qin is really asking for death. Manager Qin had served the city lord since he was young, so his status was different. Otherwise, with Manager Chen's cultivation realm, he would naturally be lacking if he wanted to be the manager of the outer mansion. However, with the city lord's support, naturally, no one dared to say a word. Xiao Yang waved his sleeves, and his expression changed greatly. The previous kindness and humility disappeared without a trace. What was left was a face that was stern without anger. The guards also felt a great pressure. At the same time, they were filled with regret. They never thought that such a humble person would be so tyrannical. It was completely unexpected. How could they have a good life after offending such a person? I said that we have to use our strength to enter. Looks like I was right. Xing Tian laughed. Xiao Yang only laughed because Xing Tian didn't know that there was a reason behind all these twists and turns. If he acted like a big boss, he wasn't here to ask for help, but to cause trouble. In the end, there would be a fight, and the matter would become non-negotiable. A stage 6 martial king dares to behave atrociously in the city lord's mansion? Chapter 2944. This shout instantly caused many people's expressions to change drastically. 6th level martial emperor. What kind of concept was that? Even in the city lord's mansion, one would be able to obtain a position like a consecrator. Ah, who would have thought that the black-robed young man had hidden his strength so well? Hiding it so well, I wonder what their motive is. The onlookers were also very curious. With the identity of a 6th level martial emperor, why did he need to be so humble? What exactly was going on here? Therefore, they all wanted to know what these three young men were planning. However, since the black-robed young man had offended Manager Chin, this matter would not be easily forgotten. Entering the city, Lord's mansion would become a dream, and he might even be killed. Although the war hadn't started yet, they could already feel that it was imperative to do so. Soon, a man in a white robe walked out. He helped Manager Chin up and asked softly, "Are you all right?" The white-robed man had a gentle and refined temperament, but the heroic spirit between his brows could not be concealed. Even the young talents could not be compared to him. "Even Su Qingbai is here. Looks like there's no room for discussion. A 6th level martial emperor against a 6th level martial emperor. This battle is going to be interesting." What a joke! Su Qingbai is considered one of the top 10 powerhouses in our Nangong city. He's one of the best among the 6th level martial emperors. That outsider is definitely no match for him. At that moment, some people even began to bet on the outcome of the battle between the black-robed young man and Su Qingbai. Of course, regardless of Su Qingbai's outcome, as long as the black-robed young man dared to make a move, he would offend the city lord's mansion. It could even be considered a direct declaration of war. When that time comes, it would be impossible for him to escape unscathed. Perhaps the final outcome would be even worse. Sometimes things were just so mysterious and unpredictable. "It's fine." Consecrator Su came just in time. "Don't let this thief cause trouble in front of the city lord's mansion," Manager Chen said angrily. Manager Chen had the authority of the city lord and was used to being a tyrant in Nangong City. Therefore, he had always been arrogant. Even the consecrators of the city lord's mansion would treat him with respect. However, these three outsiders dared to attack him. How could Manager Chen accept this? He even felt that the other party's disrespect towards him was disrespect towards the city lord. "Of course, Manager Chen, you just have to sit by the side and watch how I deal with that kid who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth," said Su Qingbai. When Manager Chen heard this, he walked to the back with peace of mind. At the same time, he gritted his teeth in hatred. He was also plotting in his heart that after Su Qingbai captured him, he would definitely skin him alive and pull out his tendons to vent the hatred in his heart. "Those who came are guests, but you injured the host. This is not the style of a guest, so are you enemies?" Su Qingbai coldly snorted and looked at Xiao Yang gloomily. At the same time, Su Qingbai began to quickly estimate the strength of his opponents and how he should win. However, Xiao Yang's aura was only revealed for a moment. Now he could no longer feel it. I'll say it again. "We are here to visit city Lord Nangong. Please inform him." Xiao Yang calmed himself down and said loudly. Su Qingbai coldly sneered when he heard this. This answer was completely incongruous, and he did not know what to make of it. After hitting Manager Chin, they still wanted to see the city lord? After slapping the city lord, they still wanted to see him? This kind of thinking could only be described as strange. However, Xiao Yang's words made the group of spectators feel a little confused. Xiao Yang was so strong, but he didn't seem to have any confidence in his words. It really made people feel a little confused. A good show was about to start. At the same time, many of the spectators began to place their bets. However, most of them were optimistic about Su Qingbai and felt that he could gain some benefits for them. Xing Tian, on the other hand, felt a little bored and yawned. Although Su Qingbai and Xiao Yang were at the same level, the difference in strength between them was not small. Therefore, Xing Tian did not need to do anything. He just needed to be a spectator. You haven't even settled the matter of hitting Manager Chin, and you want to see the city lord. Su Qingbai said coldly. The reason why Su Qingbai was so concerned about this matter was because he was very clear that if he could curry favor with Manager Chen would be able to put in a few good words for him in front of the city lord. Who knows, he might even gain some favor because of this. It was even possible for his status to rise a little. Today was a great opportunity for him to perform. How could Su Qingbai miss it? As for the fact that the other party had always been secretive, Su Qingbai felt that the other party's strength must be unstable, which was why he was acting so mysterious. When the time came, he only needed to use some tricks to easily take him down. I didn't hit anyone. I just couldn't stand his arrogant way of bullying my sister. That's why I suppressed him. Xiaoyang said calmly, as if he was talking about something very indifferent. He didn't care at all. The crowd was even more surprised after hearing this. It had been a long time since anyone dared to cause trouble in Nangong City, not to mention that this was the city lord's mansion. Therefore, they were curious about how the city lord's mansion was going to handle this. Now that the storm had been stirred up, it was hard to tell how exciting it would be. Suppress him a little? Why? Are you trying to suppress the city lord's mansion? Su Qingbai's eyes turned cold as he slowly walked forward. At the same time, Su Qingbai's aura grew stronger. Are you trying to start a war? Xiaoyang said coldly. Su Qingbai let out a hollow laugh and said, I'm not trying to start a war. It's because you disrespected the city, Lord's Mansion, and Manager Chin. Today, I, Su Qingbai, will teach you a lesson and let the world know the consequences of offending Nangong City. After hearing these words, Xiaoyang let out a hollow laugh in his heart. This Su Qingbai's name was not bad, but he was also qualified to be a henchman. At least in terms of barking, he did not fall behind at all. He was just a dog, threatening others with his master's power. You better think carefully. I'm not trying to provoke you. I just want to meet the city lord. If you insist on fighting me, you'll have to bear the consequences. Xiaoyang said coldly with a stern expression. Xiaoyang still looked like he was not trying to cause trouble, but his words were full of provocation. You will meet the city lord, but not standing. Su Qingbai's aura grew stronger as he said this. Xing Tian stood in front of Xiaoman, blocking the aura. Chapter 2945. That outsider sure talks big, daring to say that Su Qingbai would be responsible for the consequences. He really doesn't care about his own life. That idiot from the outside world always thinks he's invincible, and that no matter where he goes, it's the same. With such a prideful attitude, he's about to suffer. Maybe he does have some capabilities. After all, martial dominator realm experts are not stupid. The crowd began to discuss among themselves. They could not see through Xiaoyang, nor did they know his background. Hence, their words were just guessing. However, they clearly knew that once Su Qingbai made his move, the conflict between this black-robed young man and the city, Lord's Mansion, would truly be formed. By then, there would be a few more people being hunted down in Nangong City. That being said, it was also possible that these 3 people would not be able to leave Nangong City. Each and every one of them had made their preparations. They wanted to see what kind of situation it would be when rank 6 powerhouses clashed. They wanted to see what kind of shock it would make them feel. Su Qingbai took one step at a time toward Qinan. Now that he had a good plan, Xiaoyang had no choice but to make his move. As long as he dared to make his move, regardless of his strength, he would still die in Nangong City. This was Nangong City. If this black-robed young man dared to cause trouble here, he would be offending the entire Nangong City, and the consequences would be unimaginable. By then, everything would be out of his control. After such a long period of peace, he finally managed to earn some merits. From now on, he might even be able to gain some benefits. If Manager Chen was willing to say a few words for him, it would not be impossible for him to achieve great things in the future. Xiaoyang glanced at him calmly. At the same time, he felt that there was something wrong with this Su Qingbai's brain. trying to earn merits while completely ignoring his opponent. Isn't that the same as courting death? However, Xiaoyang would not kill him. After all, he was here to ask for help. If he were to kill his opponent right away, it would be unreasonable. What is it? Weren't you extremely fierce when you were dealing with Manager Qin just now? But now you don't dare to make a move? Su Qingbai said angrily. Because of this, Su Qingbai was even more certain that this black-robed young man was a fellow that bullied the weak and feared the strong. His strength was probably not great and could be easily taken down. Today was truly a good day. Being able to obtain merit points so quickly made him feel incomparably comfortable. Let me give you a piece of advice. It's best if you think carefully before you act. Otherwise, don't blame me when your reputation is ruined. Xiaoyang said indifferently. Xiaoyang did not have a good impression of Su Qingbai. However, his purpose for coming here was not to fight, but to meet City Lord Nangong. However, judging from the current situation, if he did not teach Su Qingbai a lesson, it would be impossible for him to meet City Lord Nangong. Therefore, Xiaoyang had many things to ponder in his heart. Most of the onlookers were cultivators, so they had sharp eyes and ears. When they heard these words, they were all shocked. This person is so arrogant. He actually dares to say such words to Su Qingbai? If he's really strong, he wouldn't say such harsh words to scare people. In my opinion, he's just a silver spear with a wax head. He doesn't have any strength. The crowd's discussion did not stop. At the same time, their eyes were filled with disdain. However, they still wanted to watch this show. However, Su Qingbai could not accept such words. How could he tolerate such mockery? Good boy, I'll let you know what pain is, Su Qingbai said while gritting his teeth. Even his face became more ferocious. Xiaoyang only smiled indifferently. Since he could not persuade Su Qingbai, there was nothing he could do. At the same time, Xiaoyang also formed a hand seal. If Su Qingbai insisted on fighting, he would let him know how powerful he was. Sometimes, one needed to be observant to flatter someone. If one still insisted on going after encountering a tough opponent, one would only be asking for humiliation. Take this. Su Qingbai growled and threw a punch. Immediately, a huge gust of wind blew. The sound of air being torn apart was like the howl of a ferocious beast. The impact of the air wave was even more shocking. It was as if one was even slightly affected, one would be torn to pieces by such power. Xiaoyang did not look sideways. His expression was still normal, and nothing special could be seen. He did not seem to take this battle to heart and felt that it was very ordinary. It could be said that there were only a handful of people in the same realm who could make Xiaoyang fear them. When the crowd saw that the black-robed youth did not move at all, they immediately began to mutter in their hearts. Could it be that this guy was scared out of his wits? Or was he just an embroidered pillow? Did he have a high realm, but no ability? However, the crowd still subconsciously held their breaths. They wanted to see how capable this arrogant youth was. Su Qingbai could not help but frown when he saw that the other party had no intention of making a move. At the same time, Su Qingbai knew very well that it was best if the other party did not make a move. His punch had directly knocked the other party off his feet and made him unable to stand up again. It seemed that it was not bad to be able to retain a lot of strength in this way. However, these thoughts were ultimately just thoughts. Xiaoyang was not someone who would resign himself to adversity. Since the other party had made a move, he naturally would not be polite. Xiaoyang pointed out with his sword finger. Immediately, a sword light flashed. The seemingly incomparably powerful fist wind was directly shattered by this sword. It was like dough that would shatter upon contact. When the crowd saw this scene, they were even more shocked. What kind of technique was this? How could it be so powerful? In an instant, a sense of uneasiness rose in Su Qingbai's heart. He felt that if he continued to stay here, he would inevitably end up with heavy injuries. Therefore, he had to block or dodge. However, Just as Su Qingbai had this thought, it was already too late before he could do anything. The sword intent had already pierced his chest. Boom! The sword intent exploded in an instant. Immediately, Su Qingbai was forced to retreat and fall to the ground. The sword intent exploded into countless sword intents that constantly swam and strangled Su Qingbai's body. The strong sword intent seemed to be unparalleled. It constantly weaved in and out, cutting through life. For a moment, Su Qingbai's heart was filled with despair. He never expected that the other party's sword intent would be so tyrannical. They were in the same realm, but he had no way of blocking it. Too fast, too domineering. Chapter 2946. At this moment, the outside of the governor's mansion was dead silent. Many people did not even dare to breathe heavily. Their hands began to tremble as they witnessed the scene before them. At this moment, they still felt that it was impossible for this to be real. However, their eyes were clear as day. How is this possible? Countless people had the same thought in their minds, as they felt that everything was too unbelievable. It was only a single exchange of blows. Yet Su Qingbai was unable to withstand it and was defeated instantly. The more they thought about it, the more confused they felt. They were of the same cultivation level. Even if the outcome was determined, it should not have happened so quickly. Su Qingbai felt even more bitter at this moment. He did not expect the black-robed young man to be so ruthless and fierce. He did not even give him any chance to react. Su Qingbai was extremely regretful now. If he had known this would happen, he would not have been so careless. If he had been prepared, he would not have lost so miserably. If he had known this person was so powerful, he would not have shown himself and ended up in such a state. However, how could there be so many things in this world? The spectators stared with their eyes and mouths agape. They felt like they were in a dream. Everything they had just witnessed was so surreal that it could even be said to be unreal. How did he do it? The next moment, countless cries of agony could be heard. Many people had placed their bets on Su Qingbai, but they did not expect him to be defeated in a single blow. If that was the case, how terrifying was the black-robed young man's strength? Could it be that he was not a sixth-order martial emperor, but a seventh-order martial emperor? Was that why he could defeat Su Qingbai so easily? One question after another appeared in their minds. However, the more they thought about it, the more terrified they felt. Some even felt that the sky of Nangong City would change after this. Could it be that this black-robed young man was hired by another faction to disrupt the situation? After this doubt appeared, many people began to discuss it. The situation in the Bright Curse realm had been going on for a long time, and some factions were planning to take a step forward. The other factions could not afford to offend them. Therefore, it was inevitable that Nangong Cheng, who was the weakest among them, would become the first target. Xiao Yong did not look at Su Qingbai, but stood there calmly. Someone like Su Qingbai was not worth looking at. The corner of Xiao Man's mouth also revealed a trace of a smile. The young master was indeed the young master. He was as handsome as before and did things without any sloppiness. There wouldn't be many things that could be settled in one move. After Su Qingbai suppressed the sword intent, he stood up shakily. His eyes were filled with resentment, and he wished he could tear the black-robed youth in front of him into pieces. Su Qingbai knew very well that after today his reputation would be ruined because of this. Even if he said that he wouldn't change, he would become a complete joke. You shouldn't have stood up. Or do you want to continue fighting? Xiaoyang sneered. Su Qingbai was speechless. He clenched his fists and looked like he wanted to attack, but he didn't dare to act rashly. At this point, Su Qingbai naturally knew how big the gap was between him and the opponent in front of him. Although Su Qingbai did underestimate his opponent just now, even if he gave it his all, he might not be able to block it. Manager Chen subconsciously took a few steps back. He did not expect this person to be a tough nut to crack. Even Su Qingbai was defeated in one move. How terrifying was his true strength! Just the thought of it was enough to make one tremble in fear. However, Manager Chun was not overly afraid. This was because he had the city lord's mansion behind him, and this was Nangong City's territory. It could even be said that this was their home. How could they be bullied here? Suddenly, Xiao Yang's eyebrows twitched. He could feel a few powerful auras approaching. In the blink of an eye, a few people stood beside Su Qingbai. One of them even supported him and helped him suppress his injuries. With just a glance, Xiao Yang could tell that these people were not weak. 4 6th-level powerhouses, and the leader was even at the 7th level. Such a lineup was not to be underestimated. In other words, such a lineup could easily dominate the Four-Realm Alliance. Xing Tian also reined in his thoughts and stared at Yi Fuqian. If necessary, he would make a move. It seems like the situation is out of control. Xing Tian's voice turned a lot deeper. Xiao Yang shook his head with a smile and said, "It's only the beginning. There's no need to be so anxious." Hearing this, Xing Tian couldn't help but be a little confused. What exactly is this fellow planning? Where did this maniac come from? How dare he cause trouble in Nangong City and injure Mr. Su? How dare he? A cultivator with a shorter stature scolded. However, the cultivator did not dare to step forward. His strength was slightly weaker than Su Qingbai's. If he stepped forward, he would most likely suffer a sword strike. In the end, he would be worse off than Su Qingbai. "Chief Sun, that person is extremely arrogant. Not only did he injure me, he even injured Manager Qin," Su Qingbai said with a trembling voice. Even at this moment, Su Qingbai did not forget to flatter Chief Sunday Manager Qin nodded his head in satisfaction after seeing Su Qingbai's loyalty to him. He would train him well in the future and make him into a trusted subordinate. Chief Sun immediately raised his head and looked at the black-robed young man. His eyes were filled with a hint of interrogation. At the same time, Chief Sun could not see through the young man's cultivation. He was confused. Soon, Chief Sun discovered the problem. It was most likely due to the robe, which prevented him from seeing through the young man's cultivation. As for the man behind the black-robed young man, he seemed to have used some method to conceal his aura. Therefore, he could not see through him. Only the woman at the back was only a 3rd-level martial emperor. She was not a threat. The fact that these 3 dared to cause trouble here was enough to prove that they were quite capable. It was even possible that they had come prepared. If they were not careful, they might suffer a great loss. Su Qingbai in front of him was a good example of this. The other 4 did not dare to act recklessly without Chief Sun's permission. They were also intimidated by Xiao Yang. This guy was too powerful to be messed with. That being said, this was Nangong City, their territory. There was no reason for them to be bullied by an outsider. "Who are you?" Chief Sun asked. Chapter 2947. Don't worry about it. Xiao Yang said calmly. At that instant, the crowd continued to gather, as if they had made up their minds to continue watching the battle. Sun Yi was the chief consecrator of Nangong City. It was not without reason that he was able to lead all the consecrators. His cultivation of the 7th level martial dominator realm was enough to suppress all the consecrators, allowing him to be the chief consecrator. Now that even Consecrator Sun was involved, the situation was no longer as simple as it seemed. Therefore, the crowd was curious to see how the battle would end. After all, the black-robed young man had slapped Su Qingbai at the entrance of the city lord's mansion, which was equivalent to slapping the city lord's mansion in the face. Was it really that easy to forget about it? Everyone at the scene thought it was impossible, so a battle was bound to take place soon. Did our Nangong City offend you in any way? Chief Sun asked. Xiao Yang shook his head and said no. Were you asked by someone to suppress our Nangong City? Chief Sun continued to ask. Xiao Yang continued to shake his head and said, no one asked me to do so. Sun Yi was even more confused after hearing the questions. What is going on now? Nangong City had never been arrogant. and the enemies they had offended were nothing. It was impossible for them to hire such an expert. Su Qingbai was confused too. What does consecrate a son mean by asking so many questions? I've already been slapped to such a state. Isn't my attitude clear enough? Isn't that enough to trigger the battle? Since Nangong City has never offended you, and you weren't asked to do so, why are you here? Consecrate a son's tone was filled with a hint of hostility. It seemed like he was going to make his move if he did not give a reasonable answer. After all, their reputation was on the line. If they did not give a reasonable answer, they would not be able to settle the matter peacefully. That being said, even if there was a reason behind it, they would not just let it go after being slapped in the face. However, the only thing they needed to think about now was how to give an account of themselves. Sun Yi groaned in his heart. He felt that since the black-robed young man was able to defeat Su Qingbai with a single move, it was highly possible that he was hiding his true strength and was a 7th-level expert. There was one more person who had yet to make his move. Thus his strength was unknown. Therefore, they had to be on guard. I have no intention of offending Nangong City. I'm only here to pay a visit to the mayor. Who would have thought that when Manager Chin came out, he would try to intimidate my sister? I couldn't stand it and tried to intimidate him. Who would have thought that a dog would jump out and try to bite me without any explanation? That's why I slapped him, Xiaoyang said calmly. In just a few sentences, Xiaoyang explained the whole matter clearly. These words made Su Qingbai so angry that he was being treated like a dog. However, Su Qingbai did not know that Manager Chin really treated him as his lackey. When Sun Yi heard this, he said, "It seems that there are many misunderstandings." There is indeed a misunderstanding. If it weren't for the scum of your city, Lord's mansion bullying others, you wouldn't have brought disgrace upon yourself, Xiaoyang said indifferently. As soon as he said this, Manager Chin and Su Qingbai's expressions turned ugly. However, Manager Chin was not afraid at all, as he knew that the mayor valued him greatly. Thus he was not afraid at all. He did not believe that the mayor would punish him because of an outsider. Therefore, the outsider would be the one at fault, not him. Sun Yi frowned his eyebrows. Normally, he would stand on the side of the city lord's mansion and punish him in a domineering manner. However, he clearly knew that the current situation was uncertain, and he might not be able to take down this black-robed young man. If there were any more accidents, this matter would only become more and more serious, and it might even reach the point where it would be out of control. Upon having this thought, Sun Yi felt helpless. Now that he was standing here, he had to deal with the situation properly. Furthermore, he had to help Nangong City regain his dignity, or else it would become a joke in the future. When that happened, many people would become a laughing stock. Even if it's a misunderstanding, as the saying goes, don't hit someone in the face. Shouldn't you give us an explanation for your ruthless actions? Sun Yi's expression changed once again. Now, Sun Yi felt like he was being forced to do something beyond his ability. He was completely helpless when he said these words, after being stared at by Manager Chin. Of course, Sun Yi was the chief consecrator, thus he did not need to be afraid of Manager Chin, who was only from the martial emperor's world. However, this person had always been narrow-minded and could not be offended. This old man, if he were to go to the mayor's place and spout some nonsense, it might cause some conflict between them. Manager Chin was extremely proud of himself. In Nangong City, those who offended him would not be able to leave in one piece. Explanation? What kind of explanation do you want? Xiaoyang asked coldly. Xiaoyang had no idea why these people were so confident, thinking that he would definitely submit to them. Sun Yi frowned his eyebrows slightly, as he was thinking of his words and the pros and cons. Instead of teaching a lesson to the dog that bites, you want to punish the person who beat the dog to protect himself. You people of Nangong City are so arrogant. Xiaoyang suddenly changed the topic and said with a hollow laugh. Immediately, Sun Yi raised his eyebrows. He did not expect Xiaoyang to speak first. Furthermore, his tone did not seem like he wanted to give an explanation. Instead, he wanted the mayor's mansion to give him an explanation first. If you think that the mayor's mansion has a different status, you can force me to give you an explanation. Let's see who's more capable. Xiao Yang said with a hollow laugh. At that moment, Sun Yi felt like he was being roasted on a rack. Previously, he thought that he had the chance to suppress this young man with his words and influence, but the change in his attitude was too fast. Since I can't pay the mayor a visit today, and his dog is about to bark again, I can only teach him a lesson on behalf of the mayor. Xiao Yang said coldly. At that moment, Sun Yi was being called a dog. As a result, Sun Yi's expression turned even uglier. This guy did not even give him a chance to speak. Instead, he made his attitude extremely clear in such a short period of time. It was as if the battle between them was inevitable. However, with Sun Yi's current strength and manpower, he was not confident that he could defeat his opponent. Such a strange person who appeared out of nowhere was indeed a headache. You came to pay me a visit, and there's a misunderstanding? Then come in and tell me what kind of misunderstanding it is. At that moment, an authoritative voice was heard from the mayor's mansion. Chapter 2948. Everyone's expression changed after hearing this. That was the city lord's voice. How could they not recognize it? At this moment, Sun Yi let out a sigh of relief. Since the city lord was here to settle this matter, it would be settled properly, and he would not have to worry about it anymore. After all, whether this matter was settled properly or not would affect his status and reputation in Nangong City. It would be best if the city lord was here, regardless of the outcome. Who would have the guts to criticize the city lord? Xiao Yang let out a wry laugh. It seemed like in this world, strength was the most important factor. Previously, he was only concerned about manners, and the other party was only a bunch of vicious dogs. Now that he knew how powerful he was, he would be able to meet the city lord. However, even if he did meet the city lord, the situation would still be quite bad. Speaking of which, this was considered a slap to their faces. It would not be easy for them to settle this matter. However, Xiao Yang was confident that with his and Xing Tian's strength, even if the city lord of Nangong City wanted to make things difficult for them, he would have to think twice. Gentlemen, the city lord wants to see you. This way, please. Sun Yi withdrew his expression and made way for them. Xiao Yang let out a calm smile and led Xiao Man into the city lord's mansion. Xing Tian followed behind. He glanced at Manager Chen and Su Qingbai and shook his head helplessly. I advise you to behave yourselves. It's fine to offend me, but it's not wise to offend him. After saying this, Xing Tian quickly followed behind them. Although Sun Yi, who was leading the way, heard the conversation clearly, he did not dare to say anything. After all, since the other party was so arrogant, he obviously had the right to do so. It was better not to offend such a person, or else it would bring more trouble to himself. Since the city lord invited them in under such circumstances, and the two of them still looked calm and fearless, they probably had the confidence to kill their way out. Therefore, it was not wise to fall out with them now. It would not be too late to wait until the city lord had met them and made a decision. Seeing Xing Tian's proud expression, Manager Chen's heart was filled with hatred. At the same time, he made up his mind to explain this matter to the city lord. He didn't believe that with his friendship with the city lord, he wouldn't kill these three villains here. Su Qingbai's heart was filled with sorrow. He didn't know what would happen to him in the future. He was afraid that there would be a lot of criticism about him. Even the city lord has stepped forward. Looks like this matter has gotten out of hand. The onlookers began to discuss again. The way they saw it, the city lord inviting them into the city lord manor was completely inviting them into a trap. It was easy for those three outsiders to enter the city lord's mansion, but it was almost impossible for them to walk out again. Although the incident at the entrance could be declared over, the people present were not in a hurry to leave. Instead, they sat there, waiting for the follow-up to appear. In their opinion, it was impossible for the city lord's mansion to let this matter go so easily. They were afraid that many things would happen in the future. The show hadn't started yet, so there was no need to be anxious. They just had to wait. The city lord's mansion could be said to be decorated in gold and jade. At a glance, one could feel the extravagance, just like a nouveau riche. The Nangong city had existed for tens of thousands of years. Although they were the weakest among the 9 great factions, their background was not bad. As the saying goes, a starving camel is still more shit than a horse. No matter how weak they were, their background could not be ignored. Xiao Man was very well behaved along the way. Most of the time, she only glanced around. Compared to the Northern Light City, this place was indeed more prosperous. However, this place was not the Northern Light City after all, so she did not have any feelings for it. Because of the people here, Xiao Man even hated this place. Their behavior made Xiao Man feel disgusted. Their style of bullying the weak and fearing the strong was too obvious. Previously, when Xiao Man did not release her aura, the guards ignored them. After being pressured by the aura, their attitude was extremely attentive. It was only because of this that he felt somewhat annoyed. If it weren't for the fact that the Nangong city was the best choice, the young master would not have waited here. He would have left long ago. Sun Yi did not say a word along the way. He knew that if he said too much, he would make more mistakes. It was best for him to keep his mouth shut. Even if something were to happen, it would not be related to him. That would be the best. As a matter of fact, Sun Yi's position as the chief consecrator was not only because he had the highest cultivation base. At the same time, he had his own way of dealing with people. After passing through 3 corridors and a few courtyards, under Sun Yi's lead, Xiaoyang and the other 2 arrived in front of a palace. City Governor Nangong, the 3 friends from the outside world have arrived. Sun Yi brought his fists together toward the palace and said, Sun Yi's heart was beating like a drum, as he was not sure what the city governor's intention was. Therefore, it was a problem for him to cooperate with him. Fellow Taoists, please come in. That dignified voice rang out once again. Sun Yi immediately complied after hearing this. This way, please. Sun Yi stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. Xiaoyang let out a calm smile and walked toward the palace, as if he was not prepared at all. Xingtian let out a yawn in an unconcerned manner. Meanwhile, he began to plan in his mind. This was because he could feel that there was a slight flow of spiritual power in the palace. This was probably due to the support of a formation. If there was an inescapable trap in the palace, they would be walking right into the trap if they entered. Xiaoyang naturally sensed it too, but he did not say anything. Xiaoyang was quite sensitive towards formations. If he were to enter alone, he would definitely be wary of them. However, they now had Xingtian from the Wanshou realm by their side. If they could work together, a small governor's mansion would not be able to trap them. It would be easy to kill their way out. Xiao Man still looked straight ahead and followed closely behind her young master. If the situation changes later, just hide behind me. Xingtian transmitted his voice using a secret technique. Xiao Man heard this and rolled her eyes at Xingtian. Xingtian shrugged helplessly. He felt that his good intentions were being treated as ill intent. Xiaoyang let out a bitter laugh. This Xingtian was still in the mood to joke at this time. However, Xiao Man's state of mind was much more relaxed after hearing this. She was not as nervous as before. After entering the palace, Xiaoyang saw a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man looked burly, but he was reading a book in his hand. It was a strange scene. Chapter 2949. The middle-aged man could be recognized at a glance. He was Nangong City's city lord Nangong Yu. Xiaoyang had heard the innkeeper mention this when he was at Yunfeng Inn. Nangong Yu had always been a straightforward person. If he could get along well with her, it would be easy for him to obtain a pass. It would not even take much effort. Of course, there was another rumor that Nangong Yu had always been fond of wine. If he could cater to her tastes, things would progress much more easily. I'm Xiaoyang. Greetings, city, Lord Nangong. Xiaoyang cupped his fists and smiled. After wasting so much time, Xiaoyang finally got to meet City, Lord Nangong. He heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. If he really fought with Chief Sun, it would be very difficult for him to obtain the entry token to the Daylight Mystic Realm, no matter what the situation was. This is my younger sister, Xiao Man. This is Xing Tian. Xiaoyang introduced them one by one. The middle-aged man put down his book and swept his gaze across the three of them. Then his gaze landed on Xing Tian. I'm Nangong Yu. Greetings, friends. The middle-aged man cupped his fists and returned the greeting. Previously, when Nangong Yu had sensed Xiaoyang's aura, she did not pay much attention to it. After all, he was only a sixth-order martial emperor. However, Xing Tian made Nangong Yu feel a little wary. She quickly came to a conclusion. This guy's strength was probably similar to hers. Please come in. Nangong Yu smiled. At the same time, she asked the servants to serve tea. There was nothing inappropriate about her etiquette. Xiaoyang did not stand on ceremony and led the two of them in to take a seat. This action made Nangong Yu even more bewildered. A seventh-order martial emperor followed Xiaoyang in like a retainer. Then what was his status? Furthermore, when she looked at the seventh-order martial emperor again, she felt that everything was natural. There was nothing awkward about it. As such, Nangong Yu was increasingly unsure of what was going on. Nangong Yu's view of Xiaoyang had also changed. To be able to subtly influence a powerful expert and make her willingly follow him, he must have some real ability. May I know why the three of you have come to my Nangong city? Nangong Yu asked with a smile. It was as if everything that had happened before had vanished into thin air, and he didn't care at all. This was the advantage of being a powerhouse. When your strength made your opponents fearful, they would become more amiable and not care too much about it. Of course, all of this was built on the premise that it didn't go overboard. If a fight really broke out, it would completely lose face, and it wouldn't be easy to negotiate. Fortunately, the situation had not developed to the worst state, and there was still room for negotiation. City Governor Nangong, we are straightforward people. We are here today because we have a request. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. Nangong, you furrowed her brows when she heard this. It seemed a little presumptuous of them to come here and ask for a favor. However, after thinking about it, it was reasonable for them to be obedient and wait outside the door, and then cause a ruckus because their subordinates didn't know what was going on. Nangong, you had been in charge here for thousands of years, and naturally understood many things. Is it because of the Daytime Secret Realm's entrance medallion? Nangong Yu asked with a smile. Coming to Nangong City at this juncture, and considering the big matter that had just happened, it was easy for Nangong Yu to figure out what was going on. Xiaoyang didn't beat around the bush and nodded his head in agreement. That's right. As long as the three of you are willing to become our Nangong City's consecrators, it won't be difficult for you to obtain the entrance medallion with your strength. Nangong Yu smiled. One of them was a sixth-order martial emperor, while the other was a seventh-order martial emperor. As for the woman, she was only a third-order martial emperor, but she could still accept it. Furthermore, they were still young and full of vigor. Their current cultivation level was probably not their peak yet. If he were to take another step forward, Nangong Cheng's status would undergo an earth-shattering change. Nangong City doesn't have many rules, as long as the three of you are restrained and listen to my orders. There are many things that can be discussed. Nangong Yu smiled. After hearing this, Xiaoyang frowned his eyebrows slightly. The conditions were not too harsh. In other words, such a deal was possible, but if that was the case, they would be restrained. This was not what Xiaoyang wanted. Of course, he could pretend to be polite, but it wouldn't be straightforward enough. When the time came, there might be a lot of trouble. We can only be your consecrators in name. Xiaoyang revealed his bottom line and said. Instantly, Nangong Yu's expression changed. There was still a reason for being a consecrator in name. It was possible that after they came out from the Daytime Secret Realm, they would no longer have any contact with Nangong City and would never return. If that was the case, they would be doing them a favor without receiving anything in return. Thus, no matter how one looked at it, Nangong City would be at a disadvantage. Are the three of you so insincere? If that's the case, there's no need for us to continue the discussion. Nangong Yu shook her head helplessly and said, although the strength of these three people was indeed worthy of respect, befriending them was one thing. If the price they paid was too high and they didn't get anything in return, it would be a huge loss. If they were from the bright curse realm, Nangong, you could accept it. If anything happened in the future, she would only need to send a message. As for these three outsiders, they might go to other realms after this experience. By then, there would be no news from them, and this so-called friendship would be for naught. Although Nangong Yu was forthright, she was not stupid. Furthermore, these matters needed to be considered clearly. Xing Tian smiled indifferently. Since Xiaoyang wanted to settle this peacefully, he only needed to be a bystander. If they had to take out something in exchange, it would naturally be feasible. However, the world was unpredictable. Who could say for sure? If the discussion failed, it was inevitable that they would barge into the secret realm. When that time came, it would be hard to say what kind of consequences would arise. Nangong Yu was curious as to why this young man was so confident. After she had clearly rejected him, he still seemed so indifferent. Furthermore, it was as if everything was within his expectations. Hence, Nangong Yu was not in a hurry to send him off. She wanted to see what kind of conditions this young man could take out to tempt her. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said, I naturally came with sincerity. Although we can only be your consecrators in name, we can give you some substantial compensation as an exchange. Chapter 2950. None of them were fools. Naturally, they would not make a losing deal. Hence, Xiaoyang had already made plans from the very beginning. However, he did not know how big this Nangong Yu's appetite was. How much would she need to eat to be able to give him 3 tokens? Oh! Nangong Yu was now very curious. The other party's calmness meant that he must have a lot of resources in his hands. However, what kind of things did they have in their hands to be able to move him? These are the spirit gathering pills that I have personally refined. They can help King Wu level 9 cultivators to condense their spiritual meridians until they become martial emperors, Xiaoyang said as he took out a small bottle of pills. Xing Tian looked at the bottle of pills and immediately frowned. His expression was filled with shock. In just a few years, the Grey Wolf tribe has produced dozens of martial emperors. Is this the effect of these pills? Xing Tian seemed to have thought of something and asked. Xiaoyang smiled and nodded. It could be said that these pills were one of the reasons why the Grey Wolf tribe was able to become a tribe. If it were not for these spirit-gathering pills, with the Grey Wolf tribe's talent, who knew how long it would take for a martial emperor to appear. However, with these pills, things were different. Xing Tian smiled and nodded. At the same time, he was extremely shocked. The effect of these pills was not simple. Nangong Yu's eyebrows could not help but twitch. Although he had many martial emperors under his command, he felt that it was not enough. After all, who would dislike having more powerful cultivators? At the same time, Nangong Yu had also gathered information that Xiaoyang and Xing Tian were not from the same world. Furthermore, their relationship was probably not that good. Otherwise, he would have only heard of such miraculous pills and would not have known about them. Governor Nangong, you don't have to rush to a conclusion. You can first give these pills to the juniors who have been stuck at the peak of King Wu for a long time to test their effects. Of course, this bottle can only be considered as a deposit. When we come out, we will make up for it with 3 more bottles. What do you think? Xiaoyang smiled and said, 1 bottle of pills was enough to create a martial emperor. If someone was more talented, they might not even finish 1 bottle. Nangong Yu picked up the elixir and looked at it. Then, she smiled and nodded her head. This gift is indeed not bad. However, if you want to exchange it with just this, isn't it a little insufficient? Nangong Yu laughed. Xiaoyang nodded and said, Indeed, so I have other preparations. Moreover, it was unknown whether one would be able to obtain any fortuitous encounters after entering the daytime secret realm. Moreover, this was a gamble. If he went in and didn't get anything, then all the things he had invested would be a huge loss. Of course, if he could form a good relationship with Nan Gongcheng, that would be acceptable too. After entering the secret ground of daylight, if any of the disciples of Nangong City are in trouble, we will try our best to help as long as it's within our capabilities. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said in a deep tone. When Nangong heard this, she frowned slightly. This could only be considered a verbal agreement. Moreover, he might not be able to put it into action. Therefore, this matter was as if it was dispensable. If Nangong was familiar with their personalities, she would agree that it was a good agreement, like having an extra protective talisman. However, he knew nothing about these three outsiders. How could he not be worried? Besides, their goal was to obtain the badge. Perhaps they were willing to tolerate anything in order to achieve their goal. Once he obtained it, his true colors would be revealed, and those so-called agreements would be thrown out of his mind. Nangong had seen many people like this before. Therefore, verbal agreements were the most unreliable. Nangong let out a laugh. At the same time, she was confused. These people seemed to be quite smart. But why were their words so useless? Or were they trying to trick me into not knowing anything? Xing Tian opened his mouth, but did not say anything. Xing Tian had always felt that Xiaoyang's character was rather reliable. Once he said something, he would definitely stick to his words, and stick to them. Even thunder wouldn't be able to move him. However, they were in the same profession. Xing Tian's words were like a shill, unable to convince others. Therefore, Xing Tian could only look down and did not say anything else. Seeing how confident Xiaoyang was, he must have a card up his sleeve. That was why he was so calm. We are very sincere. Of course, it's just that you don't understand our characters, Xiaoyang said. Nangong only smiled and did not say anything else. It was naturally best to get straight to the point. Business was business. There was no need to beat around the bush and exaggerate. This is only our second condition. Of course, there is a third condition, Xiaoyang said. Nangong's brows also revealed a trace of joy. She really wanted to see how Xiaoyang's third act of sincerity was going to be. This business was about equal exchange. Of course, it would be best if they could earn some benefits. Moreover, they were the ones asking for help. Therefore, Nangong was not afraid and just waited for the other party to name their price. The third sincerity is that I can help Governor Nangong solve a problem for you, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Hearing these words, Nangong's brows instantly furrowed. She was indeed quite moved by the third condition. Nangong, you only had one enemy that gave her a headache. If he could solve it for her, she did not mind giving him Xiaoyang's token. How about this, a condition in exchange for a passage token? Xiaoyang said with a smile. Nangong was still not sure what the third condition was. She frowned and said, Are you sure you are his opponent? Instantly, Xiaoyang was stunned. He did not understand what Nangong meant. Soon after, he reacted and shook his head with a smile. What I want to deal with is not City Master Nangong's enemies outside, but the problem with your body. Hearing these words, Nangong suddenly stood up. Her brows were filled with anger. What problem is there with my body? I respect you as my guests. If you want to talk nonsense, I won't allow it. As Nangong said this, her anger became even more intense. Nangong was not sure what this young man meant. Xiaoyang smiled and shook his head. I'm afraid that the problem with your body has been bothering you for a long time. It is the reason why your cultivation is stagnant and even regressing. If this continues, even if you have miraculous pills to stabilize your cultivation, I'm afraid that in less than 10 years, your cultivation level will drop until you die. Instantly, Nangong's face turned even uglier. Chapter 2951. If Xiaoyang was just spouting nonsense, Nangong naturally wouldn't believe him. However, The symptoms mentioned by the other party were incomparably similar, so he couldn't help but think more about it. How do you know so much about it? Nangong Yu asked coldly. If this person was sent by his enemy, then he would be digging his own grave if he believed him so easily. There's no other reason. I'm also an expert in using poison. Therefore, when I came in, I saw that his cheeks were thin and small, his ears were sunken, and his face was cold. Xiaoyang said confidently. As for the third sincerity, it was also found by Xiaoyang at the last minute. As for the things that he had prepared, he could naturally leave them behind and didn't need to take them out. Nangong Yu took a few steps back in fear. Now he also didn't dare to believe it. This black-robed youth seemed to have some real ability. However, he didn't know if the other party could solve this problem for him. Nangong Yu had been searching for a solution for decades, but in the end, he couldn't find any solution. The poison had already invaded his sea of consciousness, and the poisonous bug was hiding in his heart meridians. Nangong Yu had also tried to use his spiritual power to kill the poisonous bug, but the end result was that he would feel a heartache as soon as he tried to do anything. It was as if the poisonous bug knew everything about him. If he forcefully killed the poisonous bug, he was afraid that he would die from the poison. Nangong Yu had also consulted the divine doctor of the bright curse world. In the end, she found out that the poisonous bug was extremely poisonous. Once it died, it would release all the poison. At that time, even a golden immortal wouldn't be able to save his life. Therefore, Nangong Yu could only use a gentler pill to temporarily raise the poisonous bug. This way, he would suffer less damage. I wonder how fellow Taoist will solve this problem. Nangong Yu asked in a deep voice. If this problem could really be solved, then Nangong Yu wouldn't have to continue to have a headache. This time, Nangong Yu didn't directly enter the Bright Day secret realm because of this. She was afraid that if she went, it would be difficult for her to return. Governor Nangong was afflicted with the heart-devouring cicada. This type of poisonous insect has always been cautious. Once it feels threatened, it will bite its host and release poison at the same time. Once it loses its vitality, the heart-devouring cicada's body will rot quickly, and all of its poison will explode. At that time, no one can save it, Xiaoyang said in a deep voice. When Nangong Yu heard this, she nodded her head solemnly. This was not much different from what she had heard. It's easy to solve. As long as you lure the heart-devouring cicada out of your body and take some medicinal pills, you'll be able to recover, Xiaoyang said casually as if this problem wasn't difficult at all. Nangong Yu furrowed her brows as well. There were many thoughts running through her mind. He naturally wanted to break free from this torture, but he didn't dare to say too much. Now that the godly doctor had entered the secret realm of daylight, he couldn't summon him to confront Xiaoyang and see if he was telling the truth. Of course, Nangong Yu could wait for the godly doctor to come out before taking action. However, the secret realm of daylight would not wait for anyone. If there was any delay, the token in his hand would be like a piece of scrap metal and wouldn't be of much use. Nangong Yu's heart was in a dilemma. She felt that no matter what choice she made, there would be risks. Facing these outsiders who had just arrived, it was still a problem whether she could trust them or not. However, Nangong Yu grasped one point. Since these three outsiders had a request, they wouldn't act recklessly before getting the token. Governor Nangong, there's not much time left. Take your time to think about it. Our sincerity is as such. Whether it can meet your expectations or not, it's up to you to evaluate it yourself, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Nangong Yu furrowed her brows as she pondered over this matter in her heart. I've said what I need to say. Let's part here. We'll stay in Nangong City for 3 days. If you're willing to cooperate, come and find me. Xiaoyang stood up and cupped his fists to bid farewell. Nangong Yu cupped her fists as well. However, her heart was in deep thought. Don't be in such a hurry, fellow cultivator. I'm sure you haven't found a place to stay in Nangong City. If you don't mind, please stay in the governor's mansion. Consider it our hospitality as a host, Nangong Yu said. Xiao Yang nodded and said, "That would be the best. I'll have to trouble the governor." Immediately, Nan Gongyu instructed the servants to arrange for the 3 guests to stay. After the matter was settled, Nan Gongyu paced back and forth on the spot. Naturally, he was extremely unwilling, but at the same time he was also in a dilemma. The heart-devouring parasitic worm had been harming him for a long time. Of course, he wanted to resolve it quickly. However, he didn't know if the 3 outsiders had the ability to do so. They might even be pawns arranged by his enemies. It was highly possible that they would kill him. Immediately, Nan Gongyu turned her head and looked at the bottle of pills left behind. "Perhaps this bottle of pills will be enough to verify it," Nan Gongyu muttered. Immediately, Nan Gongyu took the pills and quickly left the Grand Hall. Manager Chen had been waiting outside the Grand Hall for a long time. At the same time, he was mulling over the words in his heart. How should he explain this matter so that the governor would be enraged and start a war with the 3 outsiders? Now, Manager Chen felt that he had lost his face. Hence, he must make sure that the 3 outsiders die a horrible death. "Governor, those 3 outsiders are treacherous and cunning." However, before Manager Chen could finish his words, he was glared at by the governor. Instantly, Manager Chen felt a little fearful and immediately shut his mouth. Manager Chen knew the governor's temperament very well. Now that he was acting like this, it meant that he really had an urgent matter. If he continued to disturb him, he was afraid that he would find trouble for himself. Su Qingbai, who was standing at the side, was also stunned. Manager Chen had dragged him over to add fuel to the fire. However, the governor didn't even look at him. Hence, who was he trying to act pitiful for? "Manager Chen, what should we do? I heard that the governor had arranged for the 3 outsiders to stay at the governor's mansion," Su Qingbai said in a wrong tone. After suffering such a blow, Su Qingbai's reputation in Nangong City would definitely suffer a disastrous decline, and he would become the joke of many people. Hence, Su Qingbai could not tolerate it. Hence, he felt that the 3 outsiders had to die. Since he didn't have the capability, he could only place all his hopes on the governor. Manager Chen frowned. He couldn't determine the reason behind the governor's change. Since he wasn't clear about the situation, he couldn't simply say anything. "Don't be hasty. Let me find someone to figure out what's going on first. Then we'll decide what to do. Those 3 brats slapped my face, and they still want to stay here peacefully? In their dreams." Manager Chen harumphed coldly. After receiving such a reply, Su Qingbai felt a lot more relieved. Chapter 2952. Xiao Yang and the other 2 were arranged to stay in a quiet little courtyard. They were happy to be idle and did not care about what was happening outside. On the first day, Xiao Yang brought Xiao Man to Nangong City for a stroll. This girl was very curious when they came, so this satisfied her wish. Although Xiao Man did not say a word, Xiao Yang could tell. Furthermore, the governor of Nangong City was probably unable to make a decision today. Therefore, it was fine to go out for a stroll. Of course, if Nangongyu really could not make up her mind, then there was nothing they could do. 3 days later, they could only head to the central region to see if there were any other methods. If there was really no other way, then they could only continue to wait. They could only barge in when the guards were careless. That was something they had no choice but to do. However, Xiaoyang was very certain that Nangongyu would not let such a good opportunity slip away from her hands. Therefore, there was a high probability that she would find him to make this deal. Therefore, Xiaoyang could not show any signs of anxiousness. This was the only way to prevent Nangongyu from thinking that he had a favor to ask of her. At that time, if Nangongyu used this to blackmail Xiaoyang, that would be the most terrifying thing. In the end, not only would the deal not work out, but they would also become enemies. Xingtian did not seem to have much interest in strolling around the streets. Therefore, he stayed in the courtyard alone and did not say much. When Xiaoyang brought Xiao Man out of the city, Lord's residence, there were still quite a few people who hadn't left yet. They were all waiting for news. They wanted to know what would happen to the three outsiders in the end. However, when they saw Xiao Yang talking and laughing while bringing Xiao Man out, their expressions were different. Many people were very shocked. After causing such a big scene, they were still able to escape unscathed? At the same time, they also realized that the person who had followed them was nowhere to be seen. No one could figure out what the situation was now. Before the governor's mansion gave out accurate information, no one could be sure of the situation. They could only continue to wait. After leaving the city lord's mansion and arriving at the bustling street, Xiao Man's mood immediately rose a lot. Clearly, she was still somewhat unaccustomed to the oppressive atmosphere from before. Although it was already afternoon, Nangong City was still bustling with activity, so there were still people walking on the streets. There were also many hawkers hawking their wares. It was very lively. At the same time, they also found out that Nangong City's economy was relatively developed. Furthermore, they had a cooperative relationship with the cursed god sect, so they had built this city to be extremely grand. This was also because the central region's daytime secret realm had opened. Many people had gone there to join in the fun. Otherwise, this place would be even more lively. Normally, there were quite a number of martial emperor realm experts in Nangong City, but now most of them had gone to the realm of daylight. Therefore, most of the cultivators who stayed behind were King Wu realm cultivators. They had no one to rely on, and they could not enter the secret realm with their own strength, so they could only stay here. As for those who were truly capable, they would have gone to the secret realm long ago if they weren't restrained. For example, Su Qingbai and the others, as they were outsiders, they had yet to receive a badge from the city lord. Therefore, they stayed at the city lord's mansion instead of leaving. A large part of the reason why Su Qingbai took the initiative to stand up for Manager Chen was because he hoped that Manager Chen could speak up for him and obtain the token. However, he didn't know that the plan in his heart didn't succeed. Instead, he suffered a beating and ended up with a humiliating result. In a short period of time, Xiao Yang's name had spread throughout Nangong City. Everyone knew about him. The fact that he was able to cause trouble at the entrance of the city lord's mansion and come out unscathed after entering the place was enough to prove that the black-robed young man was not simple. The fact that he was able to come out alive proved his strength even more. If it weren't for his strength that even the city lord was intimidated by, the group of people would not have survived. At the same time, many people felt that the three outsiders who were able to come out unscathed had most likely become part of the city lord's mansion. Furthermore, they were a new noble and might even be popular for a while. Therefore, many of the forces in Nangong City began to have turbulent undercurrents. Many people wanted to curry favor with the new noble. In the future, they might need to take care of him. So how could they not curry favor with him? Along the way, Xiao Man picked and chose from the stalls and bought some things that she liked. Back in the flowing cloud world, Xiao Man would receive a portion of money every month. Of course, it was Xiao Yang's, and she was only keeping it safe for him. Even though Xiao Man had a lot of money on her, she was very careful with her spending and was not willing to buy anything too precious for herself. Even though Xiao Yang reminded her a few times that she did not have to worry about money, Xiao Man was still the same. Xiao Man bought some rouge, face powder, and some local specialties. She then bought some daily necessities. Although these things did not seem to be very useful when they were outside, they could be used to relieve boredom when they were bored. Naturally, they were not bad. Moreover, Xiao Man's temperament hadn't changed much. In other words, she had always been the same in front of Xiao Yang. Nothing had changed at all. When they were tired from strolling, they stopped at a restaurant to rest and eat. As the master and servants sat there, many people looked at them. Their matter had caused a great deal of commotion in Nangong City, so many people recognized them. Of course, Xiao Yang's black robe was more eye-catching and could be recognized at a glance. At night, they stood at the highest point other than the city lord's mansion and looked at the night scenery. A smile appeared on Xiao Man's face as she looked at the brightly lit city. It had been a long time since she enjoyed such beautiful scenery. It seemed that ever since she reached the upper stream, she had been going through a rather boring cultivation. Thinking about this, Xiao Man's state of mind slowly relaxed. When she was in the middle stream, it was said that the upper stream was like heaven. However, looking at it now, it did not seem to be much different. Furthermore, every step they took was very difficult. As her cultivation level increased, Xiao Man also felt that the happiness from before seemed to be getting further and further away. Young master, one day, will you soar to the upper stream like when you were in the middle stream, and I won't be able to catch up? Xiao Man suddenly felt a little uncomfortable and said she had always been with the young master, but she felt that after this trip, the next time they parted would come. There was still the great world above the middle stream, so the young master would not stay here for too long. This was not the end. Chapter 2953. Xiao Yang could only smile after hearing this. It was certain that he was going to the outside world. Furthermore, he still had many unfinished business in his heart. Therefore, he could not stay here forever. At the same time, Xiao Yang had a very special feeling towards the drifting cloud world. What he felt before was mostly fake. However, in the drifting cloud world, he had experienced what a sincere friendship was like. It would not change because of some benefits. If possible, Xiao Yang was willing to bring them along. However, time waits for no one. No one could be certain about this. That night, Xiao Yang and Xiao Man talked a lot. At the same time, they also made a promise. Xiao Man would follow closely. No matter where Xiao Yang went, she would try her best to follow him without missing a beat. However, how could all of this come so easily? In the middle of the night, after seeing countless lights being extinguished, Xiao Yang and Xiao Man returned to the city, Lord's mansion. This time, no one stopped them from going to the city, Lord's mansion. In fact, there were even people eagerly leading the way. Everyone knew that Xiao Yang was treated as a guest by the city lord. Naturally, such an important guest was not someone they could afford to offend. As the saying goes, enemies always meet. On the way back, they coincidentally bumped into Manager Chin. Although Xiao Yang did not think much of it, Manager Chin was so angry that he gritted his teeth. He felt that these three outsiders had embarrassed him greatly and wanted to beat them to death. However, the situation was unclear, and he did not know what the city lord was planning to do. Therefore, Manager Chin could only test the waters. The guard who led the way was extremely nervous at that time. He was afraid that the two would fight. In the end, Manager Chin could only swallow his anger and avoid them. He did not dare to start a fight. Manager Chin was very vengeful. This time he avoided them because the situation was unclear. Therefore, he did not dare to act rashly. However, he already had a plan in his heart. After tonight, this ungrateful brat would die in Nangong City. Xiao Yang did not care about the thoughts of these small fries. He could even imagine that these guys were definitely up to something in the dark. However, Xiao Yang was not afraid. With his strength, it was still possible for him to escape from Nangong City. Moreover, with Xing Tian by his side, there was even less of a need to worry. At that time, the answer to who would lose more was also very clear. Furthermore, although Nangong was outspoken, she wasn't stupid. Naturally, he knew what to do and what to do. After returning to his room, Xiao Yang began to rest. He knew that he might have something big to do next, and it would consume a lot of energy. No matter what decision Nangong made, Xiao Yang would inevitably be exhausted. At this moment, Nangong was sitting in the main hall. She was pacing left and right, looking exhausted and hesitant. Below the main hall, Chief Sun had already arrived with the core members of the city Lord's mansion. Chief Disciple Sun's expression was ugly as well. At the same time, he was trying to figure out what to do next. The incident during the day seemed to have calmed down, but in reality, it was only a temporary calm. However, Chief Disciple Sun was not summoned by the city lord, but by Manager Chin. Manager Chen had always relied on his status as the city lord and was used to acting like a tyrant. These consecrators and guests could not help but be wary of him. As for Chief Disciple's son, it was completely because everyone else had arrived and he had no choice. However, at this moment, Consecrator's son felt uncomfortable, as if he was sitting on pins and needles. Nangongyu raised her head and looked at the consecrators and guests who had gathered. She sneered and said, "Chief Disciple's son, do you have something to say in the middle of the night?" Previously, Nangongyu had been thinking about her own matters and did not pay much attention to them. Now that she saw them, she realized something. "It was Manager Chen who sent someone to inform me that the city lord has something important to discuss, which is why I am here." "Son," he said in a trembling voice. The city lord's emotions did not seem to be very stable, and it was obvious that this visit was abrupt. It was Manager Chen's decision and not the city lord's summon. Sun Yi was also unsure of the current situation, and his heart was beating like a drum. Nangongyu suddenly snorted coldly, and he rubbed his forehead helplessly. He had indeed given Manager Chen quite a bit of authority, but he did not expect that this fellow had really thought of himself as a big shot and had started to force him to do things. "City Lord, those three outsiders have humiliated Manager Chen. Their actions are equivalent to humiliating our Nangong city. Please do something about it." Su Qingbai was the first to step forward and said. When Nangongyu heard this, she snorted coldly, and her eyes were filled with disdain. Right now, she was not in the mood to care about this. As for their words, she did not take them to heart. Now, Nangongyu only saw benefits. As for other matters, they could be put aside for the time being. "Are you trying to force me to abdicate?" Nangongyu suddenly changed the topic, and her tone instantly became much colder. These people had all listened to Manager Chen's arrangements and had not thought about the city lord's plans. When she said this, Su Qingbai's legs started to tremble uncontrollably. Such a crime was so serious that he, Su Qingbai, could not bear it. Chief Disciple's son remained silent because he felt that no matter what he said next, the situation would become very bad. Hence, he simply did not say anything and just listened. "I have my own plans for this matter. You can all leave now. I will settle this score later." Nangongyu snorted coldly and said. At this moment, Su Qingbai felt even more uncomfortable. He did not know if the words "settle this score later" were directed at him or Xiaoyang. "I will take my leave." Chief Disciple's son was the first to speak and began to walk out. The others followed suit and began to leave. Now that the city lord's emotions were fluctuating, it was not convenient for them to discuss matters. Hence, it was better to wait for the decision to be made. If they continued to stay, they would be forcing the city lord to make a decision. The nature of the situation would change, and when that time came, they would not be able to bear the consequences. "City lord, do you really have the heart to watch this old servant be humiliated and do nothing?" At this moment, Manager Chen walked in and said loudly. When he heard Manager Chen's voice, Su Qingbai instantly felt as if he had a savior. He immediately walked out and supported the seemingly weak Manager Chen. Nangongyu glanced at him and immediately felt an indescribable disgust towards Su Qingbai in her heart. This guy really knew how to take advantage of the situation. "Uncle Chin, this matter has not been decided yet. Please be patient. After a period of time, I will naturally give you an explanation." Nangongyu smiled helplessly. Nangongyu's feelings towards Manager Chin were indeed not ordinary. However, after tonight it had begun to change. Chapter 2954. On the second day, everything in the mayor's mansion had returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. However, after Manager Chen's coercion, he understood that the mayor was angry. If he continued to persist, he would not be able to bear the consequences. All the kindness he had shown in the past would vanish into thin air. In an instant, many people began to lay low. Many people who were prepared to curry favor with Manager Chen began to divide their ranks, afraid that they would be unlucky. In the past, Manager Chen had abused his power in the mayor's mansion, and the mayor had laughed it off. However, this time he actually instigated the mayor's men to force the mayor to make a decision. The significance of this action was different. It was not as simple as going overboard. There was no sense of propriety. Ever since then, Manager Chen had locked himself in his room. Manager Chen was indeed unwilling last night. However, after seeing the mayor's anger, he did not dare to push further and could only retreat. Before they completely shed all pretense of cordiality, everything could still be discussed. However, once they went overboard, it would be a different story. Xiao Yang was not clear about what had happened in the mayor's mansion, and he did not need to care about it. The internal affairs of the mayor's mansion had nothing to do with Xiao Yang. He only needed to achieve his goal. Moreover, his conditions were just that. If this business deal could be done, then it would be done. If it could not be done, then it would be over. On the second day, there was no news. Xiao Yang and Xiao Man sat in the courtyard for the entire day and did not go out. On the third day, Xing Tian could not sit still any longer and asked, "Tomorrow we will head directly to the central region?" From Xing Tian's point of view, there was no news from the mayor's side. He was afraid that this business deal could not be done. Xiao Yang nodded and said, "If it is not possible, then we will go to the central region to take a look before making any plans." To them, entering the secret realm of daylight was something that must be done. Delaying here for 3 days was already their limit. Of course, keeping one's word was also the most basic. If they continued to stay, Nangong you would probably continue to demand more. As for the bottle of pills, it was a reward for staying in Nangong City for the past few days. Xing Tian shook his head. At the same time, he did not understand why Xiao Yang was so insistent. Such an astute person would not use such a trick. Moreover, most of his words had no proof. So how could Nangong you believe him so easily? It could even be said that this was a gamble. A gamble on whether Nangong you would take the risk. But Nangong you had lived for so long. How could she easily trust an outsider? What's more, they didn't understand each other at all. However, Xing Tian wasn't in a hurry. After all, the time limit wasn't up yet. He just had to continue waiting. Perhaps Xiao Yang would really make the right bet, which would save him a lot of trouble. Under normal circumstances, Xing Tian would naturally choose to barge in. He wouldn't care about the consequences. It was not his style to be overly cautious and overcautious. Moreover, Xing Tian had the right to be arrogant. So what if he offended the bright curse realm? However, Xiao Yang was different. Unless he had no other choice, he wouldn't do such a thing. At noon, Nangong you arrived. Strange, she really came. Xing Tian muttered in his heart. He felt that this matter was very strange. Of course, he wasn't sure why Nangong you came this time. "Brother Xiao, are you satisfied with staying in the mansion these few days? Did you neglect anything?" Nangong you cupped her fists and smiled. Xiao Yang cupped his fists and returned the greeting, saying not bad. The word acceptable caused Nangong you to laugh awkwardly. She was clear that Manager Chen had always been the one to cover the sky with one hand in this residence. Many people wanted to curry favor with him, so naturally it was impossible for him to give the three of them any face. "City Lord, what do you think? If you can give an answer now, it's not bad. We don't have to waste time." Xiao Yang smiled. At this time, if Nangong you still didn't make a decision, then there was no room for discussion. "Nangong, you didn't think that this young man would be so straightforward." She smiled and nodded, saying, "I wonder how confident Brother Xiao is?" This time, Nangong yu's arrival wasn't sudden at all. This was because he had distributed the pills the day before yesterday. In just 2 days, a disciple who had been stuck at the peak of King Wu's cultivation level for a long time had successfully broken through. There was also a junior at the beginning stage of the 9th level who had similarly reached a higher level. This proved that the pills given by Xiao Yang were indeed extraordinary. It wasn't an exaggeration to call a pill that could make a martial emperor a miracle pill. Furthermore, since Xiaoyang was able to refine such a miraculous pill, he might really have a way to cure the poison. The heart-devouring cicada had caused Nan Gongyu to suffer for decades. He naturally wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible. Therefore, when he received the news, he immediately rushed over. 100%. Xiaoyang said resolutely. Even though the heart-devouring cicada was ferocious, it couldn't do much to Xiaoyang. It was easy to lure him out. Hearing this, Nan Gongyu frowned a little. As long as City Lord Nangong cooperates, eliminating a mere heart-devouring cicada is a piece of cake. Xiaoyang smilingly said, now that Nan Gongyu was in trouble again. Even the godly doctor of the bright curse boundary couldn't do anything about it. How could this young man be so confident? Therefore, Nan Gongyu couldn't help but wonder if Xiaoyang was telling the truth. If she made one wrong move, she would be doomed eternally. Until now, Nan Gongyu was still in a dilemma. Of course, this is a huge gamble to begin with. What we are betting on is my, Xiaoyang's, character and your, City Lord Nangong's courage. Xiaoyang smiled. Then, Xiaoyang sat down and didn't say anything more. There was no point in saying anything more. It might even make Nan Gongyu more suspicious and think that he had ulterior motives. Brother Xiao is right, Nan Gongyu said lightly, but the pressure in her heart was immense. Now that the choice was in front of her, it seemed that if she made the wrong choice, she would end up in a miserable state. It could be said that the probability of success was only 1 in 4. As for how to make this 1 in all, that was a problem. Seeing that the young man still didn't care, Nan Gongyu shook her head helplessly and smiled bitterly. Now the problem seemed to be completely on his side, and the choice was his own problem. Xiaoyang and the others didn't rush her. They just sat there and waited for her to make a decision. After a long while, Nan Gongyu took a deep breath and said, I hope Brother Xiao won't bully me. Chapter 2955. Xiaoyang smiled and said, Governor Nangong, you should think about it carefully. Once we start, your life will be in my hands. Don't be careless. Since I am here, I will naturally trust you, Nan Gongyu said as she made up her mind. Now that the opportunity had appeared, if she did not grab hold of it, she could only watch as her cultivation level continued to drop until all her hard work was consumed and she died. Nan Gongyu did not want to die in such a humiliating manner. So this deal is considered a done deal? Xiaoyang smiled. Nan Gongyu nodded and said, If you can lure the heart-devouring cicada out for me, I will definitely give you the 3 entry tokens. Xiaoyang nodded his head and agreed to it. Xing Tian was stunned when he saw this. He could not understand why Nan Gongyu was so anxious. Nan Gongyu's thoughts were simple. She wanted to enter the secret realm of daylight, so she was willing to take the risk. Moreover, Xiaoyang was the only one who had the ability to control the heart-devouring cicada. In the future, there would be very few people who had the ability to do so. Nan Gongyu could understand why Xing Tian would follow behind Xiaoyang, even though his cultivation level was lower than Xing Tian's. However, there were still many difficult and complicated diseases among cultivators. Alchemists and cultivators who were good at saving people were highly respected. Governor Nangong, please come in, Xiaoyang smiled and said. When Nan Gongyu heard this, she immediately walked into Xiaoyang's house. After the two of them entered the house, Xiaoyang closed the door and took out a jade jar from his storage ring. Governor Nangong, just lie on the bed. I will explain it to you in detail, Xiaoyang said calmly. Nangong, you lay down as she heard this. At the same time, her heart was filled with anticipation. Perhaps today was the best day to cure the poison. Of course, Nangong, you had not come here unprepared. Outside this courtyard, Chief Sun had already brought many experts to surround it. If anything were to happen to him, they would not be able to leave this place alive. At the same time, Nangong, you also left behind a strand of her soul. If the time was right, she would be able to seize another body and be reborn. He wasn't overly trusting, but he was also taking a risk. Xiao Yang and Xing Tian naturally sensed that the number of experts around them had increased as well. However, they simply turned a blind eye and didn't pursue the matter. Ordinary means naturally can't lure the heart-devouring cicada out, so I will inject the poison into your body. It's not the method of fighting poison with poison, but using poison to lure poison, Xiaoyang said. Of course, it was better to make things clear now, so that Nangong Yu could be at ease. Otherwise, if he didn't trust Xiaoyang and suddenly exploded, a good thing might become a bad thing. You're also proficient in refining poisons. Nangong Yu asked in shock. Xiaoyang nodded with a smile and said, The Tao of poison is my forte. The Tao of alchemy is secondary. Hearing this, Nangong Yu's heart was instantly filled with shock. This guy was able to refine the spirit-gathering pill with a slightly inferior Tao of alchemy. Then, what kind of terrifying insight would he have in refining poisons? Thinking of this, Nangong Yu felt a chill run down her spine. When you are ready, we will begin, Xiaoyang said. Nangong Yu nodded. She had already mentally prepared herself. Immediately, Xiaoyang pointed a finger at Nangong Yu's forehead. The poison that he had concocted over the past few days was directly injected into Nangong Yu's body. Because Nangong Yu did not deliberately resist, it quickly invaded her heart meridian. Nangong Yu also felt a little muddle-headed, and her entire body became numb. Moreover, this feeling was very strange. There was no pain, but it made her feel extremely cold. What the heart-devouring cicada ate was the heart blood of a cultivator, but at the same time, the heart-devouring cicada was a poisonous creature. Therefore, when it encountered some poison, it would find it difficult to control itself. The heart blood of a cultivator was the delicacy of the heart-devouring cicada, and this kind of poison was an irresistible temptation for this beast. After the heart-devouring cicada felt the beauty of the poison, it began to move. It turned its body and began to crawl. Nangong Yu also used her inner vision to see the heart-devouring cicada that had taken the initiative to move. Instantly, she felt a little relieved. At the same time, she was also very glad that she had made the right bet this time. The easiest way was to directly open a hole in Nangong Yu's chest and let it crawl out. However, doing so would most likely frighten the heart-devouring cicada. When that time came and it began to release poison, the consequences would be unimaginable. Of course, Xiaoyang was here. No matter how poisonous the heart-devouring cicada was, it would be useless. He would completely absorb it. However, Xiaoyang wanted the heart-devouring cicada alive. Naturally, he would not let it disappear just like that. Under the guidance of the poison, the heart-devouring cicada quickly crawled out of the heart meridian and began to move upwards. After seeing the heart-devouring cicada leave, Nangong Yu secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Everything was finally coming to an end. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, was watching with rapt attention. This was the most crucial moment. The heart-devouring cicada had always been very cautious. If it sensed that something was wrong, it might explode. At the same time, Xiaoyang placed the jade jar beside Nangong Yu and dripped a drop of blood essence into it. When the essence blood fell, a strange fragrance wafted out. Instantly, even Nangong Yu, who was feeling a little drowsy, felt a lot more awake. After the strange fragrance spread out, the heart-devouring cicada was like a drug addict. It felt that it could not resist something, and its crawling speed became faster and faster. Nangong Yu's skin also began to bulge rapidly, looking a little sinister and terrifying. At this moment, Nangong Yu's heart was filled with excitement. This thing was important. If it was taken away, she would not have to worry about it day and night. She would not have to flip through medical books every day to find a solution. It could be said that in the past few decades, Nangong Yu had flipped through countless medical books. In terms of medical skills, she could be considered to have made some small achievements. After a short while, the heart-devouring cicada crawled out of Nan Gongyu's mouth and directly entered the jade jar. Xiaoyang immediately used his spiritual energy to seal the jade jar, preventing it from escaping. The heart-devouring cicada seemed to have not noticed anything and happily ate the drop of blood essence. Xiaoyang immediately formed another seal, and the poison that had entered Nan Gongyu's body was quickly withdrawn. After the poison was withdrawn, the numbness immediately disappeared. Nan Gongyu immediately felt refreshed, comfortable. Nan Gongyu laughed loudly. For the past few decades, because of the heart-devouring cicada, he had always felt very sullen and anxious. Now he finally had no more burdens and could do whatever he wanted. Chapter 2956. In the past few decades, Nan Gongyu had been enduring the ravages of the heart-devouring cicada. He could feel his spiritual energy constantly depleting, although he had used pills to protect it. As the heart-devouring cicada grew stronger, he could not make ends meet and his spiritual energy began to decline. Previously, Xiaoyang's words were not to scare him, but the truth. He knew this and knew the pros and cons. That was why he was so restless and quickly made the decision to ask Xiaoyang to remove the heart-devouring cicada for him. It could be said that Nan Gongyu's cultivation had not improved in the past few years and had even declined a little. Now that the heart-devouring cicada had been removed, he immediately felt refreshed and comfortable. Why is fellow Xiao still keeping this harmful thing? Why don't you just crush it? Nan Gongyu asked in confusion. Nan Gongyu hated the heart-devouring cicada to the core and wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible. Leaving it here would always be a knot in his heart. Xiaoyang smiled indifferently and said, "Crushing the heart-devouring cicada is as easy as flipping my hand. However, this poisonous thing is extremely powerful. When the time comes and the poison explodes, I'm afraid the entire city, Lord's Mansion, will be affected and countless cultivators will lose their lives." This was not Xiaoyang's shocking news, but the fact that this poisonous thing could make a 7th-level martial king powerless showed how terrifying it was. Although it was small, if all the poison were to explode, the entire Nangong city would be affected and most of the innocent people would lose their lives. Furthermore, the heart-devouring cicada was indeed a top-grade poisonous thing. If it was raised well, it would be of great help to Xiaoyang in the future. Xiaoyang naturally could not explain this to Nan Gongyu. The more he spoke, the more likely it would be to make mistakes. Furthermore, if Nan Gongyu doubted him because of this, it would not be good. The good karma that was formed might turn into hatred in the blink of an eye. Furthermore, they had only just started to come into contact with it. There were some things that could not be exposed. Some trump cards should be kept hidden for as long as possible. I was too short-sighted. I hope fellow Taoist Xiao won't take offense. I will never forget this life-saving grace. In the future, if you need Nan Gongcheng's help in any way, just let me know. As Nan Gongyu spoke, her expression turned serious as she cupped her hands and bowed. Although they had not interacted much, the current Nan Gongyu was full of admiration for Xiaoyang and was moved to tears. Even the divine doctor of the bright cursed domain couldn't do anything about the heart-devouring cicada. Nan Gongyu was almost waiting for death. She didn't expect that there would be a chance to get rid of it today. Naturally, she was very excited. Moreover, Xiaoyang didn't spend much time to take him down so easily. It was clear that he was very skillful. Now, Nan Gongyu finally understood why Xiaoyang would lead the group with a cultivation of 6th Order Martial Emperor. With such means, how could people not respect him? Xiaoyang immediately kept the jade jar and supported Nan Gongyu, who was about to kneel down. He said, "Castellan Nangong, there is no need to be so courteous. We are just taking what we need. We are all friends. Naturally, we should benefit from each other." Now that the matter was settled, Xiaoyang secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He only hoped that Nan Gongyu's vision wasn't too narrow. If she dared to go back on her words, he wouldn't mind spending more effort to send the heart-devouring cicada back. Brother Xiao is wise. I have learned a lot. Nan Gongyu said. At the same time, her attitude became much more humble. Previously, she didn't understand Xiao Yang's capabilities. Therefore, she had the arrogance of a castellan. But now that she knew how powerful Xiao Yang was, she naturally didn't dare to be disrespectful. In fact, in Nan Gongyu's opinion, such a wonderful person was an existence that needed to be respected. If she could be on good terms with him, she would have a way out if she needed his help in the future. Xiao Yang only smiled indifferently. He didn't really care about this. Whether Nan Gongyu was suitable to be friends with was not something that could be determined now. Time would reveal a person's heart. If he didn't betray her kindness, Xiao Yang naturally wouldn't betray her. Although the heart-devouring cicada has been removed, you still can't be careless. The remaining poison hasn't dissipated yet. You have to nourish it. I have a few bottles of pills here that have some effect. Please take them, Castellan Nangong. Xiao Yang took out a few jade bottles and placed them on the table. At this moment, Nan Gongyu was so emotional that she couldn't speak. At the same time, she was a little fearful. Not only was this kid's medical skills great, he was also very meticulous in his work. If she were to be schemed against by such a person, she wouldn't even know how she died in the end. Therefore, Nan Gongyu knew that it was better to be friends with such a person. Once they became enemies, the consequences would be unimaginable. Thank you for your advice, Nan Gongyu said solemnly. Xiao Yang stood up at the same time and said, Castellan Nangong, you should hurry up and clean up the remaining poison. Come find me after the situation stabilizes. With that, Xiao Yang turned around and left. Just as he walked out, Xiao Yang saw Chief Sun and a group of experts waiting in the courtyard. Although they were chatting and laughing with Xing Tian, it was obvious that this was Nan Gongyu's arrangement. After all, as one of the castellans of the four cities, Nan Gongyu's status was extremely high. How could she risk her life so easily? Even if she had to take the risk, she would have to have a backup plan. If Xiao Yang and his group dared to harm her life, they would never be able to leave Nangong City. It could be said that Nan Gongyu's decision was a little crazy, but she wasn't stupid. In the beginning, Nan Gongyu didn't have much hope. However, she didn't expect Xiao Yang to be able to remove the heart-devouring cicada so easily. It was truly shocking. How is it? Xing Tian asked when he saw Xiao Yang walk out of the room. At the same time, Chief Sun and the rest were also on guard as they watched attentively. If anything were to go wrong, they would immediately capture these three outsiders, or even kill them on the spot. When he comes out, we can take the badge and head to the daytime secret ground, Xiao Yang said calmly. After hearing this, everyone let out sighs of relief in their hearts. If that was the case, then the current situation was still fine. It was not to the point of being out of control. Sun Yi and the rest understood that if the castellan was free from the torture of the heart-devouring cicada, it would be a great help to Nangong City. Because of this, Nangong City's reputation among the four cities was unstable, causing their status among the four cities to be on the verge of collapse. If City Castellan Nangong goes back on his words, I'll be very busy, Xiao Yang said with a cold grin on his face. Chapter 29:57. Xing Tian laughed as well. At first, he was wondering why Xiao Yang would show his sincerity. However, on second thought, he realized that none of them were easy to deal with. Xiao Yang wasn't doing this to show his weakness. Instead, he was doing this to let the other party see his sincerity. If Nangong Cheng dared to go back on his words after receiving the benefits, then Xiao Yang would definitely fight him to the death. By then, Nangong Cheng would have to pay a hefty price. Xiao Yang was confident in his strength, which was why he was so fearless. Of course, it also depended on whether Nan Gongyu's mind was clear and whether her decision was correct. If he dared to act recklessly, the final result would be even more miserable than before. When Xiao Yang went to the Yin Flame realm, Xing Tian also met Xian Feng and asked him a few questions. The answer he received was that Xiao Yang's mastery of poison was unmatched in the Bewildering Tribe. In fact, even the entire Bewildering Tribe combined would not be his match in terms of poison. This was also the reason why Xialing Miao and the others of the Bewildering Tribe were killed in such a short period of time, and why Shi Yunfeng could not make it in time to help them. Don't worry, the city lord has always been a man of his words. He will never go back on his words. Chief Sun said with a smile. Xiao Yang played with the teacup and said with a smile, "That's for the best. Otherwise, the entire Nangong city will be in a terrible situation." After hearing this, Sun Yi could not help but feel a chill down his spine. At the same time, he was extremely wary of Xing Tian. If a battle were to break out, the damage to Nangong city would not be small. On the other hand, a few cultivators behind Sun Yi seemed to be unconvinced by these words. Each of them had an angry look on their faces. It was obvious that they did not agree with the words of this outsider, and even felt disgusted. However, since Chief Sun did not do anything, they did not dare to act recklessly. Now that Xiao Yang and Xing Tian were the VIP guests of Nangong City, if they were to offend them, it would be difficult for them to explain themselves to the city lord. Xiao Yang did not pay attention to those people. They were all in the same realm. Although they had some strength, they could not do anything to him. Now, Xiao Yang had done everything he could. Now, it all depended on Nangong Yu's attitude and whether she was willing to honor the agreement. How long will it take for the city lord to come out? Sun Yi asked hesitantly. What he was most concerned about was Governor Nangong's current condition. Even though he could sense that City Governor Nangong's aura was stable, he had yet to reveal himself. Therefore, Sun Yi was still a little worried. Therefore, he wanted to get some information out of him. Currently, the main branch of Nangong City had already headed to the secret realm of daylight. Most of them were external guests and consecrators. If anything were to happen to City Lord Nangong, as the head of the external guests and consecrators, he would not be able to get away scot-free. Once the main branch blamed him, not only would he no longer have a foothold in Nangong City, he might even be hunted down due to being implicated. He would no longer be able to stay in the bright curse realm. However, the city lord's attitude was too firm. It was not that Sun Yi did not try to persuade him, but it was not very effective. The other consecrators also pricked up their ears. Towards Xiao Yang's appearance, they more or less harbored some enmity. This outsider asked for 3 badges at once. One of them might not be able to enter the bright curse realm. Therefore, how could they be kind to Xiao Yang? Furthermore, once Xiao Yang succeeded this time with the city lord's temper, he might just give them the badges. By then, 3 of them might not be able to enter the bright curse realm. This was indeed a conflict between their standpoints. They were in a dilemma. They hoped that Xiao Yang would succeed, but they also hoped that he would fail. Let's see what the city lord thinks about it. Xiao Yang said calmly. As soon as he said that, everyone was confused. What exactly did he mean? However, they did not dare to offend him directly. They could only think about it in their hearts. Sun Yi let out an awkward laugh and did not say anything else. From the previous incident, Sun Yi could tell that Xiao Yang was indeed a nice person, but he had a weird temper too. Or else, he would not have offended Manager Qin. Since Xiao Yang came to Nangong City to ask for the badges, it was impossible that he did not know anything about it. If that was the case, he still dared to offend Manager Qin. From this, it could be seen that he was quite confident. It could even be said that he came prepared. Such a person was indeed terrifying. Furthermore, a 7th-rank cultivator was behaving like an underling in front of him. Therefore, how could he not be cautious? As long as the situation did not develop in a bad way, it was fine for him to be more tolerant. At least in terms of his reputation, it was better not to tear him apart. Or else, it would not be beneficial for anyone. In fact, the situation would only get worse. Sun Yi was also a smart person. He also knew that there were some things that he could just turn a blind eye to and let bygones be bygones. If he were to take everything seriously, he was afraid that both sides would not be able to gain any advantage. Therefore, Chief Sun was not in a rush. He would just continue to wait. After all, the city lord had been tortured by the heart-devouring cicada for decades. How could he come out so quickly? It could even be said that if the poison was not cleaned up, he would not come out. After suppressing it for so long, it was inevitable that it would explode. Xiao Man did not care about the unfriendly looks from the crowd. Instead, she brewed tea for Xiaoyang. Since Xing Tian was in the same boat, he also drank a cup. On the other hand, Chief Sun and the other guests were feeling awkward. The situation now was like Xiaoyang and his group were the hosts, and they were the guests. Chief Sun, if you don't mind, let's drink some tea and chat. Xiaoyang suddenly smiled and said, they were just waiting. If they could get some information from Sun Yi, it would not be a bad idea. Sun Yi was a 7th-ranked cultivator and the leader of all the guests in Nangong City. His status was extraordinary. As such, he would most likely know a lot more about some things. Chief Sun was also a wily old fox. With a faint smile, he went over and sat down. As such, the remaining guests felt a little wronged. They felt that they were in an awkward situation. They did not get to drink the tea, but their stomachs were filled with anger. Chief Sun, we are new here. Sometimes we don't know the rules. If we have offended you in any way, please point it out so that we can be more careful in the future. If there are any taboos in the bright curse boundary, please tell us so that we won't offend you without knowing it. Xiaoyang said. Chapter 2958. After hearing this, Sun Yi let out an awkward laugh. Xiaoyang had offended them since the beginning. What's the point of saying this now? At least, it would be difficult to settle the conflict between them and the guests. Unless something unexpected happened in the future, the grudge between them would be formed. However, as everyone was under the control of the Nangong City, they did not show it on the surface. On the other hand, Sun Yi and Xiaoyang did not have any conflict, since he was the leader of the foreign guests. His share would naturally not be small. On the other hand, those under him who were not able to go would blame Xiaoyang for it. On second thought, judging from how they almost fought outside the city lord's mansion, it was unlikely that Xiaoyang would treat them seriously. It was even possible that he would not even bother to look at them in the eye. This young man's way of doing things was really hard to fathom. Just as usual, even if there are some differences between the worlds, it's just the same. Sun Yi said calmly. Xiaoyang nodded his head. It was understandable after hearing this. That being said, he had already learned a lot of information when he was at Shuanghu City. He was only here to verify it. Besides, he was curious to see what kind of person Sun Yi was. However, Cultivator Xiao, there's one thing you should be careful about. Don't act like you did in the Nangong City. Our city lord has always been straightforward, not fussing over it. If it were in other places, they might feel that the visit would be a declaration of war. Sun Yi said smilingly, if Xiaoyang did not show his sincerity and his capabilities, the Nangong City would not have agreed to settle the matter with him so easily. The bright, cursed domain had always paid attention to its reputation. Moreover, there was one more thing, which was an unchanging truth since ancient times. Benefits came first. As long as there were benefits, no matter what kind of conflict it was, they would be willing to put it aside. Even if it was a blood feud, they might still work together. I'm sorry for what happened before. If it weren't for the person who sent the message, we wouldn't have fought. Xiaoyang said calmly. Sun Yi could only smile apologetically. After all, it was true that the Nangong City was in the wrong. When it came to the weak, it wasn't because they were domineering, but because the weak were ignorant. However, their attitude towards the strong was their lack of manners. Fellow Taoist Xiao, there's one more thing you have to take note of. Don't provoke the people of the cursed god sect, Sun Yi said. Xiaoyang frowned slightly. He had heard of it before. The cursed god sect was one of the 2 giants of the bright curse world. It went without saying how powerful and terrifying it was. Firstly, The cursed god sect's methods are extremely strange. If you fall into their trap, you'll be in deep trouble, Sun Yi said in a serious tone. Xiaoyang nodded. He had heard of this before, but he didn't know much about it. What kind of strange method was this? Secondly, the cursed god sect has always been protective of their own. After defeating the small fry, the big fry will step forward. If the big fry can't defeat the big fry, the old monsters will step forward until the cursed god sect wins. Sun Yi laughed involuntarily. The cursed god sect's tyrannical way of doing things had always been known in the bright curse world. Therefore, Xiaoyang didn't find it strange. Thirdly, our Nangong city is also under the cursed god sect. If there's a conflict, I'm afraid the city lord won't be able to explain it to them, Sun Yi continued. Xiaoyang nodded and said, Don't worry, Chief Sunday, unless it's absolutely necessary. I'll try my best to avoid them. Sun Yi only smiled. He didn't dare to say much about it. From his point of view, Xiaoyang didn't seem like the kind of person who would easily give in to others. Therefore, a small conflict might be magnified infinitely. In his long years of cultivation, Sun Yi had seen many geniuses. Which one of them wasn't proud and arrogant? They couldn't stand being humiliated by others. Sometimes, just a single word of disagreement could cause the situation to escalate to a point of no return. Once, there was a genius from a small sect. Because of a single wrong word, an ordinary disciple of the cursed god sect bore a grudge against him. In less than 10 days, his sect was completely destroyed. In the end, the small sect could only apologize and disappear without a trace. I heard that the Ming God sect has a genius disciple from the outside world called Ming Jun. I wonder if it's true? Xiaoyang asked expectantly. Of course. He was more concerned about Ming Jun's current situation. Nangong City's influence wasn't small. If he planted a spy in the Ming God sect, he might be able to find out some new information. That's true. Ming Jun fought 8 battles in the Ming God sect and didn't lose a single one. 5 of them are top geniuses. The other 3 are even stronger than them. Sun Yi said and couldn't help but feel hopeful. Ming Jun was also from the outside world. However, he was valued by the Ming God sect. Since then, he had entered the core and became the sect leader's personal disciple. One could only imagine how great his capabilities and luck were. Speaking of which, the cursed god sect also has a genius who's said to be invincible in the same realm. Between that person and Ming Jun, we'll only know who's truly invincible in the same realm after they fight, Sun Yi said with a smile. At the same time, Sun Yi was also looking forward to when these 2 monstrous geniuses would fight. Between the 2 of them, who would be more powerful? Xiaoyang only smiled faintly. Ming Jun's reputation in the Ming God sect was indeed good. He was also powerful. However, why was he killed in the battle with Princess Mingzhu in the Yin Flame world? They were in the same realm and were both geniuses. However, Princess Mingzhu seemed to be more skilled. Or was it because of his father's death that caused Ming Jun's Tao to be in a mess, which was why he lost his life? There were many suspicious points in this that couldn't be seen through or understood. There was something fishy about this matter. No matter how he thought about it, he felt that something was amiss. After all, Ming Jun's reputation and battle achievements in the Ming God sect were relatively outstanding. However, in his own world, it was like that? Or was he suppressed by the spirit of the world, which was why he couldn't unleash his full strength and was killed? However, in the battle with the old man in the linen robe, Xiaoyang received the help of the Yin Flame spirit. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy to kill him alone. It could even be said to be an impossible task. Xiaoyang rubbed his forehead and also felt somewhat helpless. There were too many clues in this matter. Why? Fellow Taoist Xiao wants to compete with Ming Jun? Sun Yi suddenly raised his brows and asked. They were all geniuses. They naturally wanted to compete with geniuses of the same level to determine the victor. Xiaoyang laughed involuntarily. He didn't have such thoughts. It was just that he had no choice but to do so. At this moment, Nan Gongyu also walked out.